Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Luffy Time Travel with his fiancée Brulee Charlotte. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. I still have this, but why? Luffy asked, staring down at a special object that was a gift from the woman he planned to marry. He had found himself back on Dawn Island all of a sudden just before becoming the Pirate King, and while annoyed that he was so close and yet so far at the same time, he realized that he still had all of his scars and abilities, although he needed to train his haki again to get back up to his previous level. Not just that, but he also had the present from the woman he loved. Most hadn't been able to understand why he loved her, but that didn't bother either of them, and his crew just accepted it as another quirk of their beloved captain. Loving a woman many wouldn't or would never think he'd be interested in, although they were amused that she loved him back just as much, even if she had a tough time showing it. Robin called her a tsundere or something like that. Luffy still didn't get it, but he thought it was hilarious watching his beloved yell at his crew when they called her that where she could hear. This gift was very special too. It had been made by his fiancée for his birthday and it allowed her direct access to him. As long as he had it in his possession, he was never alone because she could find him anywhere in the world with it. So I can come find you. The voice of his beloved rang from within the object, making Luffy jump and stare surprised as his beloved rose from the object with a smile on her face. Hey, are you okay? This would be the biggest distance you ever crossed, isn't it? Luffy immediately began his worried fretting over the woman, who let out a small laugh, but she seemed tired. That was exhausting. Yeah, that's the largest distance I've ever covered. Don't be surprised if I sleep for 2 days, she said, smiling at him and leaning on his smaller frame when he hugged her close, lengthening his legs with his rubber powers so that it wasn't so awkward for her. Why? You had to know we'd come for you. I'd come for you, Luffy asked, looking at her worried and making her smile slightly wider as she leant into him. I wasn't sure at first that you remembered like I did. It took me a while to work up the courage to check and see if our connection was still there, and when I did, I just couldn't stay away. I wanted to be with you for your whole journey. Living it is different from reading about it or hearing about it, she said, blushing slightly as she looked away, causing Luffy to laugh slightly as he kissed her cheek. Well, we leave in a week just to keep to the schedule from last time. I'm not sure if anyone else remembers though, Luffy admitted, making her smile slightly wider at him. Oh, I know at least a few people who do remember. My little minions, friends from when we met, asked me why I was suddenly back on the island and why no one was trying to attack me as soon as they saw me in the woods. So at least those 3 remember. They agreed to spy and let me know if I'm needed there or someone gets suspicious, she said, making Luffy blink up at her for a moment. Why? Luffy asked, clueless, no matter how long it's been since he started dating her. She and Robin had been the main tacticians of the crew after all. He was just the one to make decisions and hit things. Well, look at it this way. It doesn't seem like anyone outside of our crew, official or not, will have their memories, which means I could be an inside agent until you and the others come and get me from the island, she said, grinning and making Luffy shrug slightly. If that's what you want to do and you think it's a good idea, then you have my support just like always, but don't put yourself in danger, okay? You and the others get out of there immediately if you think you might be busted or might be in trouble, Luffy said, making her smile softly and kiss him for being worried about her. Of course, darling, she murmured as she pulled back from the kiss, making Luffy grin at her and suddenly returned to being hyperactive and goofy. His goofy nature had been one of the reasons she fell in love with him after all. The fact that he didn't care about her scars or what others deemed as her worst features was another. Come on, we're here for a week and I want to introduce you to Daden and the guys, and Makino and Mayor Woodslap, Luffy said, tugging her hand and leading her from the woods towards the mountains. You want to show me off? She teased, earning a beaming grin from him. Who wouldn't want to show off their amazingly beautiful wife? Luffy asked, earning a blush and bright but embarrassed smile from her. We aren't married yet, darling, she corrected him softly, only for him to give her a grin and a serious look. We can get married whenever you want. I can ask the mayor before we leave, or we can wait until the cruise together. Either way is fine with me, Luffy said, earning a surprised look and then a blush from his fiancée. Let's wait until the crew is all together. It would be wrong to not have them there, especially since I promised Robin she would be the maid of honor, she said after a moment, avoiding his eyes as he pulled her gently towards a hut. Brat, what are you doing, and who is that lady? A woman demanded, glaring at Luffy, although it was obvious that there was no real heat behind it since most of the apparent bandits seemed terrified by the newcomer's impressive height. Daden, this is the woman who's going to be my wife and pirate queen, Luffy said brightly as he hugged his fiancée close, making her blush a bit. Pirate queen, this is my foster mom, Daden. She's the leader of the mountain bandits, Luffy said, while Daden and the bandits' mouths dropped open in disbelief as they stared between the two of them. You could at least tell them my name, darling, she said, grinning slightly and elbowing Luffy gently. Whatever you say, Twig, Luffy teased, making her blush brightly and glare at him a bit for the use of that nickname. She shoved him a bit in the shoulder as she retorted, even as the bandits kept gaping at her in disbelief, although Daden snickered a bit at hearing her being called a twig. "My name is not Twig, and you know I don't like it when you call me that. It's Brulee, you goofball. Are you sure you two don't want a bigger boat?" one of the fishermen asked, looking at Luffy and Brulee with a sweat drop as they climbed into the boat that Luffy had picked out. The same one as last time that had a barrel of fruit already in it ready to go. "Now we'll get a bigger one soon. For now this is fine," Luffy said, knowing how this was going to end. He didn't want to take the fisherman's boat only for it to end up in a whirlpool. That wouldn't be fair to the poor fisherman. "Ready to go, dear?" Luffy asked, grinning as he helped Brulee into the boat, making her snort slightly and grin back. "Of course," a 32-year-old woman said, smiling at her much younger boyfriend. The villagers' reactions to finding out that he was dating a woman in general was funny. The reactions they had to finding out he was dating another pirate was hilarious. The looks on their fucking faces when they found out that she was only 15 years older than him and the daughter of an emperor. Priceless. It was harder to tell who was more excited for this journey. Luffy, who was ready to meet with his nakama again and get back on the way to being Pirate King. Or Brulee, who had always wanted to explore more than just Whole Cake Island and get the whole story on how her husband-to-be met his crewmates. "Hello there, Lord of the Coast," Luffy said, his eyes shadowed when the large Sea King rose up as if to swallow the ship and its 2 occupants. "Oh, that's an impressive size for the East Blue," Brulee said, looking more amused by the Sea King's appearance than she should be. She wasn't worried in the least, actually. "Get lost," Luffy glared, focusing his conqueror's haki on the Sea King. He had been honing his haki in the forest with Brulee and helping her hone her own observation and armament haki as well. Her observation would never be as good as her brother Katakuri's ... but that didn't mean she couldn't improve it some. Her armament haki was impressive, however, being able to enforce her mirrors enough to withstand a direct blow from Luffy's Red Hawk at point-blank range. "Good job, dear," Brulee said, smiling as she kissed Luffy's cheek, having not bothered to move from her spot sitting near the barrel of food they had been given. "Thanks, but you might want to go into the mirror world," Luffy said, smiling at his fiancée, who frowned slightly in confusion. "Well, if I remember right, we're about to get into a whirlpool. I can eat the food in the barrel and hop in to save me, but the barrel's too small for you or both of us, so it'd be easier for you to be in the mirror world, right?" Luffy asked, smiling at her and making her close her eyes and pinch the bridge of her nose. "I could have lost you before I even knew you existed." "All right, I'll go into the mirror world, but as soon as water starts getting in the barrel, I'm bringing you into the mirror world with me," Brulee said, making Luffy smile and kiss her cheek. "I know, I trust you. I just want to keep you safe, but if you need more convincing." Luffy trailed off as he placed his hat upon her head, which caused her to blink before blushing slightly as she pulled it down safely. "Idiot," Brulee said, blushing a bit as Luffy finished eating everything in the barrel aside from some food for her to take to the mirror world with her. His crew's reaction to him actually saving food for her the first time had been hilarious, plus the fact that he never stole food from her plate like he did everyone else's. "You're idiot. Now go," Luffy said, kissing her cheek again and making her blush brighter and splutter a bit as she summoned a mirror inside of the barrel and sank into it, taking the remaining fruits with her before closing up the portal and leaving just a small plain mirror behind. "Shishishi, time to meet Kobe again," Luffy said, grinning as he hopped into the barrel and closed the lid over the top of it, holding the mirror close so that it didn't get damaged or hit by any water in case there was a hole or crack in the barrel. "Wake up, Luffy. There's people talking," Brulee called through the mirror a while later, waking up her boyfriend who had somehow fallen asleep. "Oh yeah, I remember this part," Luffy said, grinning slightly as he woke up instantly at his girlfriend's gentle coaxing. "That was a great nap," Luffy yelled as he busted through the barrel, accidentally hitting one guy who was about to slice the barrel open. Wee, you goofball," Brulee said, rising from the mirror out of the barrel as well, causing those staring to gape in disbelief at how 2 people fit in the small barrel or at her impressive almost 12 feet tall height. "One of the 2. Oh hey, is there any meat around here?" Luffy asked, talking to Kobe and ignoring the other 2 pirates behind him that were trying to be threatening. "Don't ignore us. We're part of the Alvida pirates, you little punk," one guy shouted at Luffy, who just snickered while Brulee looked confused. "Who's Alvida? I don't recall hearing about her before," Brulee asked, looking at Luffy, who just laughed. "You wouldn't have. She's a baby whale who can walk and talk like a human. She has a low bounty compared to what you're used to, but it's pretty high by East Blue standards," Luffy said, grinning at Brulee and making the pirates and Kobe look horrified even as the 2 cowards ran off to go get their boss, dragging their friend with them. "So you got any meat around here?" Luffy asked, looking at Kobe again and making Brulee shake her head slightly with a small smile on her face. "You just ate not too long ago," Brulee said, making Luffy shrug his shoulders slightly. She was well aware of how monstrous his appetite was. It was on par with most of her siblings and even beat quite a few of the Charlotte children's own appetite. She hadn't been aware that he had always been like that though. "What can I say, dear? I need my energy, Luffy said with a grin, causing her to blush slightly as she thought about what he could do with all that energy from the food he eats. Kobe blushed as well, even though he looked kind of scared of the two, especially the tall woman with the scar. Why are you both turning red? Was it something I said? Luffy asked, tilting his head to the side innocently and making Brulee shake her head free of those thoughts for the moment. She just handed her boyfriend his beloved hat back and looked at Kobe, who squeaked a bit under her gaze. I'll explain it later, dear. Well, you heard my fiancé. Do you have any food around here? I'm a bit hungry myself. Who's the most beautiful woman to sail the seas? Alvida demanded of Kobe after she found him. Luffy and Brulee snacking in the storeroom and heard Kobe say he wanted to be a marine to catch pirates like Alvida. That's a woman, Brulee asked, surprised and making Luffy laugh at the look on Alvida's face. Man, even my mom looked better as a young woman than you do, Brulee said, making Luffy snort slightly and hug Brulee close. Well, if she looked anything like you do, then I don't doubt it, Luffy said, making Brulee blush again. I don't look that good, idiot, Brulee said, looking away, having seen pictures of her mother back when her mother had been her age. Nah, you look better, Luffy said, grinning and making Brulee blush harder. Both of them missed Kobe yelling about Alvida being a fat whale, since they honestly didn't care much. What they didn't miss was Alvida moving to slam her mace down on Kobe's head, which made Luffy grin as he got right in the way. How that lasted longer than I thought, Brulee said, amused as Alvida grinned at Kobe in a way that promised pain. Huh, both pirate and coward were confused, only for Brulee to point at the mace. The mace lasted longer than I thought it would, Brulee said, and almost as soon as the words were out of her mouth did the mace shatter, causing Alvida to step backwards in horror and shock. Try going for a swim, might help you lose a few pounds. Gum gum pistol, Luffy said, slamming his fist into Alvida's stomach and sending her flying. Now come on, let's get to Shell's town, Luffy said, grinning as they got into a boat, although Brulee was distracted by the mirror in her possession talking. Lady Brulee, we need you back here. Your mother has called for a family meeting in 2 days' time, Diesel said from within the mirror world where he worked as the go-between for Brulee and her family. He stayed in the mirror world, and as soon as one of the mirrors alerted him to Brulee being needed for something or one of her siblings about to go look for her, he ran for the mirror in her possession. And I'd need at least 1 day of rest after traveling so far via my mirrors. Alright, I'll be there soon, Brulee said, frowning as she turned to look at Luffy, who stretched up to kiss her. Go ahead, dear. I know you need to keep them from knowing the truth until the time is right. I'll let you know if Zoro remembers or not when you are able to come back, Luffy said, making Brulee smile and kiss him back before she began to sink into a mirror, which stunned and scared the others watching. What? Kobe asked, gaping as Luffy picked up the mirror she left behind and smiled at it. She ate the mirror fruit, so she's a mirror woman, Luffy said, as if that explained everything, as he grabbed Kobe and dropped into a skiff so that the Marines didn't catch them. Come on, the nearest town is Shell's town, so let's go. $% times skip $$. Hey Zoro, are you still alive? Luffy called over the wall as he stretched up to look at his first mate and swordsman, whose head shot up to meet him. Luffy knew it was his Zoro for one really particular reason. His left eye was gone. Aye, Captain, Zoro said, smirking as he noticed that it was his Luffy that was now jumping over the wall. Hard to mistake that large scar over his chest after all. Great, it'd suck for the world's greatest swordsman to be killed here in the weakest sea after all, Luffy said, grinning at his swordsman, who grinned back. Same deal as last time. I get your swords and we beat up the idiots before ditching this place before they kill you, Luffy asked, making Zoro nod his head. Yep, but where's your girl? She couldn't come this far, or is she in trouble? Zoro asked, making Luffy give a small shrug of his shoulders. Brulee can make the journey, but it tires her to cross this much distance. She was called back the other day for a family meeting. She's going to be doing a bit of a ninja thing, keeping an eye on them, but still one of us. She still has her tattoo after all, Luffy said with a grin, and making Zoro's eyebrow twitch slightly as he recalled the tattoos that the couple had gotten. Brulee had a picture of a monkey wearing a straw hat on her back. Luffy had a picture of a mirror on his back with a cream brulee on the reflection on his own back. The rest of the crew thought it was hilarious, but the 2 other women thought it was cute. Well, Captain, let's bust out of here and get something to eat before going to get the others, Zoro said, making Luffy nod his head. Yeah, cause if we have our memories, they might have theirs too. And they must be wondering what's taking us so long, Luffy said, making Zoro snort slightly at that. He knew he thought the same thing. Well, what are we waiting for? Zoro asked, making Luffy grin and dash off to get the swords. So you two know each other? Kobe asked timidly as he began to undo the binds on Zoro's arms. Yeah, and don't worry about this. I can break free easily, Zoro said, and then without explaining anything he waited until the Marines were lined up and about to shoot at them. You sure you want to do that? Zoro asked, his eye flashing slightly as he tensed his arms and broke the ropes pinning him to the cross. What the? A few Marines were shocked, but the others fired immediately. They were much more scared of Morgan. Luckily, that was when Luffy jumped down with the swords in his arms right in front of the bullet's path. Oi oi. Luffy tilted his head to the side slightly so that his hat shaded half of his face and gave him quite the scary visage according to his crewmate. The fact that the bullets didn't bother him a bit scared them even more. What made more than one Marine piss himself, however, was the next words out of Luffy's mouth. Whose bright idea was it to shoot at my swordsman? Let's be fair here. Before we go to take out Arlong, Brulee should probably get into the habit of wearing something to hide her face. Nami was the one to mention as they were eating at the Barrady, waiting on Craig to show up. Why? Because of. Brulee trailed off, self-conscious, as her hand shot up to her scar, causing Luffy to lean over and kiss it, which made her blush. No, Brulee, you look fine with the scar. That's not what I meant. What I meant is that you're still a part of ... your mom's crew, technically, right? Nami asked, looking at Brulee sympathetically and earning a small nod from the tallest of the crew. We, or rather Zoro and Luffy, got our first bounties after they beat up Arlong. If you joined us there and got a bounty, then they'll likely have your picture on the bounty. Nami began to explain, making Brulee's eyes widen slightly. And then Mama and my siblings would see it and realize that I'm a traitor, or at least know that something's going on that shouldn't be. Brulee finished, making the orange-haired girl nod while the boys looked surprised by this as well. They never even thought of it. Exactly. By wearing a mask of some sort, then you'll be able to hide your face from view, so as long as they don't get anything that implies you being, well, you in the shot, then it should be okay. Nami said, making Brulee nod slowly as well in return before Luffy said something else. Besides, if the whole world saw how beautiful she was, then I'd have to kill half of the people in the world to keep them away from my wife, Luffy said, bringing up another good point in his mind as he kissed Brulee's cheek, which had her blushing and staring down at the cup of tea in her hands. Not like you'd even have to bother with any of the weaklings, Captain. No need to waste your time with the fodder when I can use them to keep my blades sharp, Zoro said, smirking a bit as he flicked one sword out of its sheath just a little bit. Not like you'd even be able to find them, Mutt. Leave protecting Brulee-chan from the creeps up to me, Captain. None of them will get close enough to see her, Sanji said, smirking as he lit another cigarette and used Zoro's nickname amongst the allies. The demon Mutt, the rabid dog that was only tame for his master and occasionally his master's beloved. Or aren't married yet, dear. We're waiting until we have everyone gathered again, Brulee reminded her husband, who just smiled fondly and kissed her nose. Most of the rest of the customers at the restaurant could only try and not stare at the odd couple. Seriously, that lady was twice the boy's size. I know, but I can still call you my wife, Luffy said, nuzzling her cheek fondly and making her blush and look down at her drink so she didn't have to see the smirks on her crewmates' faces. She knew they were smirking or snickering. Craig's here, Sanji said, noticing the arrival of the man with his haki. So how are we going to do this? Just all of us kick some serious ass or what? Usopp asked, looking to Luffy, who tilted his hat back as he leaned against Brulee. Well, you and Nami need to start heading for her hometown so that we can set the scene for Arlong. Brulee, do you want to stay here? Or Luffy was cut off by a look from his fiancé. If I leave the three monsters alone against some idiot with an ego, then there will be too much property damage. I'll stay here and keep you three on a leash, Brulee said flatly, and making Luffy grin up at her while Nami face-palmed and Usopp began choking on his tea. Oh, this was going to be funny. Ruff ruff, Luffy barked as Zoro let out a small howl to go along with his captain. Here you are. One leash, Sanji said, actually holding a leash out to Brulee, who blushed as her palm met her forehead. Usopp and Nami both were laughing by now and ignoring the pirates that were threatening them, or trying to at least. You morons, Brulee said, her face a dark red color now as she ignored the leash that Sanji was offering her. The other end was already hooked onto a collar on Luffy's neck. To keep from looking at them until her blush died down, Brulee began creating a small hand mirror and then making and attaching more mirrors to it until it resembled a mask, sliding it on over her head. It completely hid her face and stayed on without bothering her eyesight in the least. After all, mirrors were in her domain. Nami, Usopp, it's about time for you two to leave, yeah. After all, Mihawk's on the way, Luffy said, something tickling his observation haki as he looked up and smiled dangerously at the Krieg pirates that were trying to threaten the chefs. We're the most dangerous pirates in the East Blue, Krieg was boasting loudly as he glared at the chefs and remaining pirates. Only because you outnumber the other pirates in the East Blue, Luffy said calmly, and making there be a long silence for a moment before all of the Krieg pirates glared at him and growled darkly. Besides, the East Blue is the weakest of the seas. Fools like you wouldn't even last in paradise, much less the New World, Brulee said, adding that in with a small shrug as she stood up beside her beloved with the other two of the monster trio flanking them. And how would you know that? Jin asked, looking at the tall woman whose face was covered but she could still tell where they were. I'm from the New World. Trust me, I have dozens of brothers and sisters that are able to take out your entire crew without breaking a sweat, Brulee said, smirking and making some of the opposing pirates look horrified at that information. Don't bother yourself with them, love. After all, the hawk came searching for its prey, Luffy said, making everyone look confused aside from his crew before suddenly Krieg's derelict ship was sliced in half. Well then, looks like it's time to earn my title, Zoro said, smirking as he watched Mihawk block all of the bullets with just his blade tip. Mihawk, I'm here to challenge you for the title of world's greatest swordsman, Zoro said, stepping forward and making Mihawk look over and narrow his eyes at the green-haired sword wielder. Very well, perhaps this will ease my boredom, Mihawk said, observing the boy's power and reaching for his black blade without hesitation. Zoro, Luffy said sharply as he looked at his swordsman who was grinning dangerously. Yes, Captain, Zoro asked, wondering if his captain would try and talk him out of fighting Mihawk again. Don't hold back. Make me proud to be your captain, Luffy said, making Zoro's grin widen to almost devilish levels. Aye, Zoro said, unsheathing his swords and narrowing his one good eye at Mihawk. The battle for world's greatest swordsman had begun. What the hell? Krieg was shocked and a bit pale when the three blades crossed with Mihawk's one. There had been a brief moment of nothing after the blades crashed before there was a large blast of wind, and it seemed as if everything got sharper or slashed. There was a parting in the sea around them. The few clouds above moved apart as if they had been slashed, and anyone that had been near them that wasn't a Straw Hat or Zeph was knocked back just by the air pressure, and a few poor sods lost a limb or two. A fight between two true swordsmen. Engrave this in your minds, folks, cause you'll never see a fight like this again in your lifetimes, Zeph said, staring as the two swordsmen exchanged more attacks. Swords blocking swords and creating sparks where they impacted as the two men moved fluidly and faster than most could keep up with. Small and deep slashes appeared on both fighters in various spots as they dashed back and forth. Sister Ammon would betray Mama to see this, Brulee murmured as she watched the fight with wide eyes behind the rather crystal-like mirrors. She had arranged them so that they were small mirrors that all stuck together and reflected anything to either side of her face as well as in front of her above her head, and behind her, since she was adding more pieces to it to make it more like a helmet than a mask, and with the way she made it arranged it didn't even look like glass. I don't blame her. I'd betray someone who treats their children like property for an apple pie, Luffy said without ever moving his eyes from his swordsman who seemed to be fighting Mihawk on even grounds. And you hate pies, Sanji voiced unnecessarily as he watched, wincing when one swipe of Mihawk's sword cut off Zoro's left ear. Zoro didn't hesitate even if Mihawk was surprised just a bit by actually getting in a blow like that so early in the fight. Mihawk promptly lost his nose to the sword in Zoro's left hand before he could regain his composure. You're doing well for someone whose swords are holding him back, Mihawk said, his voice a bit off as he narrowed his eyes while he seemed to move just a bit faster as blood poured from where his nose had been a mere moment prior. Although more than a few chefs and even the Krieg pirates looked sick at the sight. Work with what you have, yes, Zoro asked around Watto as he kept up with Mihawk's increased pace, but his swords were beginning to crack. HMPH. True, Mihawk said, although you could tell he was impressed by now as he sent a green slash at Zoro, who just cut through it with Watto and sent his own flying slash back in return. I did not expect to run into someone like you here in East Blue, the weakest of the seas, Mihawk said, barely avoiding the flying slash due to his surprise of meeting someone who knew that technique in this sea. He then had to avoid the tornado that Zoro sent at him even as the cracks on the two nameless swords got worse. They'd never survive this fight. East Blue may be called the weakest, but make no mistake, Zoro then got into one of his more advanced stances as he prepared to try and end this before the blood loss got to him too badly and his swords broke. This sea brought forth not just the new greatest swordsman ... but it is also the sea that birthed the next king of pirate. Zoro yelled the last part proudly as he prepared the attack just as Mihawk closed in on him. Santoryu, Demon Mutt's piercing bite, Zoro said, causing a few people to faceplant while Zoro threw his head back and spat out the sword in his mouth, making it arc high up into the air as he dashed forward and clashed with Mihawk, using some pretty fancy weaving and dodging. Zoro blocked the black blade with the two in his hand and then leaned his head back to catch Watto back in his mouth by the hilt, although his swords all turned black with armament haki much to Mihawk's surprise. Swinging his head around, Zoro's sword struck true and ripped across Mihawk's chest in a motion that left what vaguely resembled a fang on the man's chest as he fell backwards a bit. To the onlooker's amazement, the blast let out a flying slash after it finished cleaving its path, splitting a good chunk of sea and the fish in it that had been in that direction. Thankfully, it hadn't been aimed in the Baradi's direction. Impressive. Not many can make me bleed so much, Mihawk said, although he was starting to lose consciousness due to blood loss but hung on stubbornly. He could tell that Zoro was the same, however. That attack is usually aimed at a person's throat. A dog always lunges for the throat after all, Zoro said, smirking a bit and yet looking a bit annoyed that his attack was off even as one sword finally broke, leaving him to put Watto in his right hand now. Tell me, was that one of your actual moves or just something you developed for laughs? Mihawk asked with a bit of a weak laugh, making Zoro grin at him despite the cut across his jaw and his missing ear making his teeth look bloody. Everyone says I'm like a dog that attacks all whom get in my master's way. Shall we end this in one last blow, Mihawk-sensei? Zoro asked, making Mihawk give a deep laugh that echoed along the waves. Yes, I believe we shall, Tell me though, Demon Mutt, what is your name? Mihawk asked, grinning at Zoro, who smiled back even wider with his teeth painted red. Zoro, Rorona Zoro. Zoro answered, making Mihawk nod. A fine, proud name, Rorona. Now then, let's finish this, Mihawk said, launching back towards Zoro, who launched at him at the same time. Mihawk's blade slashed across Zoro's chest, causing there to be a spray of blood as they passed each other before Zoro fell down a bit, gasping for air and clutching his chest as his remaining regular sword broke before he stood back up. The Krieg flagship that had been behind Zoro was completely ripped apart by the after effect of the slash, killing quite a few of the poor bastards on board. That's when the black blade and the arm still holding it fell to the wooden deck. Congratulations, Rorona, Mihawk gasped out as well, falling to the ground next to his right arm ... as well as a good portion of his stomach and chest, which had also been cut. The slash that Zoro's last attack had made in the sea went on as far as the eye could see, and it seemed as if the very clouds above them had been torn apart by the sword. Thank you, Mihawk-sensei, for everything, Zoro said, making Mihawk give a wet laugh as his necklace sword fell, the chain having been cut by Zoro's last attack as well, and it clattered to the deck next to him. Don't thank me for anything. Now they will all come after you. Not many will be worthy of your true blade though, Mihawk warned as he grasped his black blade tightly in his left hand now, wanting to hold the sword as he died. I understand ... May I keep the necklace sword for those unworthy of Wado? And the blades I will get in the future? Zoro asked, bowing to Mihawk, who let out another wet, weak laugh. Yes, now make the world know, make me proud. Make your captain proud, Mihawk said before the light left his eyes. I will, sensei, Zoro said, blinking back the tears in his one good eye as he picked up the necklace before turning towards where Luffy and the others were watching, stunned as he hobbled over. Luffy was just grinning so wide a few were worried his face would break if it weren't made of rubber as Zoro made it back aboard the Barady amidst the shocked dead silence. I did it, Captain. Now I promise that I will make you the Pirate King, Zoro shouted, planting Wado in the wooden deck as he kneeled before Luffy, who laughed at him and nodded. Zoro began to tilt sideways, however, as blood loss finally caught up with him. Looks like I did it, huh? Kuina, Zoro whispered slightly as he gripped the sword tighter. The last thing he heard before blacking out was his captain's gentle order. Rest, Zoro. You've more than earned it. Now that my swordsman has had his fun, let's finish this little fight, shall we? Luffy asked, smirking as he looked at the remaining few Krieg pirates while Sanji moved Zoro to somewhere safer and out of the potential battlefield. You're just. Krieg was too stunned to speak as he stared shocked at Luffy, who was amused at the reactions they had to seeing the world's greatest swordsman be bested by what they believed was a rookie pirate, which technically was true in this timeline, but in the last one ... well ... that's another story entirely. I'm just the man who will become the king of pirates. After all, who else would be worthy to have the world's greatest swordsman on his crew? Luffy said, smirking widely and damn proud of Zoro for the fight he put on. Even now the sea still churned horribly as it adjusted to the new underwater trench Zoro's last attack had left. Oi, Captain, should I take care of this myself, or do you want to have some fun too? Sanji asked, returning from putting Zoro in the restaurant so that he wouldn't be in the middle of the fight while unconscious. Love, Luffy asked, looking at his fiancée to see if she wanted to fight and earning a small shrug of the tall woman's shoulders. Honestly, no matter who it is that fights them, it's more like we'd be bullying them considering how weak they are in comparison. Honestly, you wouldn't have to raise a finger to knock them all out, hun. Even the so-called captain of their crew. Brulee said, her voice distorted from behind the mirrors, making it sound as if it were echoing repeatedly, which was really messing with the Krieg pirate's head. Are you calling us weak? You arrogant bit, one pirate shot at Brulee, who merely held up a mirror that seemed to absorb the bullet. I'm a copycat woman. Anything you throw at me, my crystals can absorb it, copy it, and send it right back at you. Reflection, Brulee said, smirking at the looks of shock and horror on the low-class pirates' faces as the bullet was shot out of the mirror right back at the pirate, who was shot with the reflection of his own bullet. That was a trick that Brulee had learned with Usopp's and Zoro's help. She could now take things like bullets and sword strikes to her mirrors, as long as she reinforced them with haki, and send the bullet or a phantom of the sword back at the attacker. It had taken her months to develop her power that much so that it didn't drain her completely when she did it. Now, however, after over 2 years of training and building it up ... she could do it 8 or 9 times before she began to tire. Besides, by making it seem like she was using crystals and copying instead of mirrors and reflections, no one would be able to link Crystal Copycat with Brulee Charlotte. What the? Krieg was shocked and gaping before a strong force washed over him and his crew, knocking them all unconscious. Nicely done, dear, Brulee said, smiling down at her husband, who stretched up and kissed her on the cheek, or well, where her cheek usually was when not covered by mirrors. And nice job keeping them from knowing who you are, Luffy said in return before turning to Sanji, Johnny, and Yasaku. Sanji looked unbothered by the display while Johnny and Yasaku both were pale and trembling. All right, how's Zoro? Luffy asked, knowing that Sanji had checked on Zoro while taking him to safety. and had requested that the chef with the most first aid training try and tend to the swordsman. Shitty Murimo is alive. Knowing him, he'll be up in about an hour or two trying to pretend that he's perfectly fine. His ear's gone, of course, and he nearly lost use of his left arm according to the doc. Not to mention the various cuts across the entire front of his body, some of which needed stitches. We gave him a blood transfusion, so he should be fine though, Sanji reported after blowing out a small column of smoke as he looked at his captain. Good, then it's time to go help Nami and Usopp. Let's grab him and go, Luffy said, making Sanji nod as he smacked Johnny and Yasaku into not trembling in fear. You two idiots, grab the Murimo and get him on the ship. We're leaving, Sanji said, making the two swordsmen gulp and rush off to grab their Aniki. I promise I will find the all-blue shitty old man. And, Arigato. Sanji kneeled down and bowed to the deck of the ship to the assembled chefs, but Zeph in particular. I owe you a hell of a lot, Sanji said, blinking back his tears as he said his goodbyes for the second time. Don't catch a cold, lil eggplant, Zeph said, smirking as Sanji stood up and turned to leave. Luffy and Brulee saying nothing about the tears in his eyes. Don't get caught by the Germa, Sanji whispered back, making Zeph look at him slightly alarmed, but Sanji just walked over to the little boat they'll be using till they get Mary back. Don't worry, Sanji, we won't let it happen again, Luffy said, placing a hand on Sanji's shoulder and earning a grateful smile from the cook as Zoro was gently loaded onto the small boat. No wonder Pudding is so confused about whether to love you or not. You're one of a kind, Sanji, Brulee said, trying to make the blonde feel better and earning a grateful look from the cook as well. The only reason Sanji's eyes didn't turn to hearts and he didn't do his noodle dance was simple. He wasn't dumb enough to flirt or even act like he was going to make advances on his captain's woman. Not after the last time. Being kicked clear across an island sent one hell of a message after all. I'm looking for Arlong. Taller than me but shorter than her, shark teeth, ran like a little bitch from the Grand Line to the weakest sea. Seen him? Luffy asked casually after kicking the doors off of Arlong Park. His description of the feared shark fishman had his crewmates snickering and laughing while the fishmen were furious. You, who do you think you are? Arlong asked, making Luffy shrug his shoulders with an innocent smile on his face. Me, I'm the guy who's going to kick your ass, Luffy said without batting an eye, making Brulee snort slightly. You've been taking lessons on pissing people off, haven't you? Brulee asked, watching as the fishmen mocked them and laughed, but Arlong looked pissed. He needed lessons for that. I thought it was all natural, Sanji said, surprised from behind his captain. What, like your sister was last night? Zoro couldn't help but say it. He really couldn't. If there was one thing about his former family that you would get your ass kicked by insulting in front of Sanji, it would be his sister. Well, his mother too, but even Zoro and Luffy didn't mock the dead. It was only because he knew that Zoro didn't really mean it that Sanji wasn't really out to kill the swordsman. Marimo, I'm going to kill you. Sanji burst into flames literally as he lunged for the wounded swordsman, who just laughed a bit as he dove towards the fishmen. The Arlong pirates were all knocked out or just outright killed by accident as Sanji chased after Zoro in a twisted version of cat and mouse. Luffy just laughed. He knew they didn't mean anything by it. Well, at least he said it about Sanji's sister and not mine. I would have killed him, Brulee said, amused as she watched the two take out most of the Arlong pirates. One of the most serious battles we faced while in East Blue the first time around ... And honestly, I'm a bit ashamed of how weak I was that these guys were a challenge, Usopp said, shaking his head and making Nami give a small snort. What, and you think I'm not upset at how weak these guys are in comparison to what we're used to? Talk about a blow to my ego, Nami said, twirling the regular baton she was using until Usopp got the stuff needed to remake her climate baton. And why are you after me, you filthy human? Arlong demanded, glaring darkly at Luffy, who took off his hat and placed it on Nami's head. You see her? She's my navigator in Nakama. You made her cry ... And no one makes my Nakama cry, Luffy said, growling slightly as he glared down Arlong, while Nami just smiled a bit and pulled the ends of the hat down over her ears. Oh, I'm a bit jealous, dear. You let her wear your hat, Brulee teased as Luffy stepped back up next to her again, making Luffy snicker a bit. Don't be jealous. I didn't give her an engagement ring after all, Luff said, bringing Brulee's hand up to his lips and pressing a kiss to the engagement ring that was still on her finger where it belonged. Goofball, Brulee said, blushing behind her mirrors, not that anyone else would notice. Yours? Oh wait, we still have to beat up the idiots, don't we? Or did Zoro and Sanji take care of them all? Luffy grinned before turning to look at the fishmen again and laughing at how many Zoro and Sanji had taken out with their game. Took out all but Arlong, Captain. He's all yours, Zoro said as he finally stopped running since he was starting to get dizzy again. Shitty Marimo, you shouldn't be causing such trouble. You lost an ear and almost half the blood in your body literally like 2 days ago, Sanji said, helping to support the idiot Moss head over to the wall and making Nami sigh as she moved to check him over. Aside from Chopper and Robin, she was the one with the most medical skills out of the original crew. Here, let me see if he reopened anything, Brulee said, sighing as she moved over to check on Zoro and earning looks from the rest of the crew aside from Luffy. I'm no doctor, but I have enough medical training to be called a battlefield medic. With siblings like mine that always end up getting hurt, you learn fast, Brulee said as she kneeled down to check on the green-haired swordsman. Shark over shark. Arlong threw the water drops at Brulee, causing her to roll her eyes and turn around. Crystal wall, Brulee said, throwing up a wall of reinforced mirrors around the rest of the crew, making the water splash off harmlessly. Yes, that's my cue. Gum gum. Here Luffy decided to not play and use one of his stronger attacks to destroy both Arlong and the building behind him. Red Hawk Gatling. Luffy cried as his fists caught on fire and then shot forward, taking Arlong by surprise and taking him down. It wasn't long before the building behind Arlong was destroyed and collapsing, with Arlong burnt to a crisp and collapsing as well. Everyone good? Luffy asked, casually turning back to his crew and making them nod, unfazed by the display of power, while the normal townspeople gaped in disbelief and shock. You there? What is your name? Nezumi the rat showed up and began trying to confiscate the money while arresting the pirates, who gave him unimpressed looks. I'm Monkey D. Luffy, and I'm going to be king of the pirates. That's my fiancé copycat Crystal, my first mate and the world's new strongest swordsman Zoro, my cook Sanji, my navigator Nami, and my sniper Yuza, Luffy said with a grin that suddenly turned dark and dangerous. And if you ever let your cowardice and greed get in the way of actually doing your damn job, then I guarantee you that I won't be your worst nightmare. My grandpa will, Luffy said, making Nezumi give a weak, scared scoff. What could your grandpa do to me? I'm a Marine captain, Nezumi said arrogantly and making Luffy yawn in his face. The only Marine captain I actually respect is Smokey. I'll be impressed if you were at least Vice Admiral level. All the training Garp Jiji gave me makes me at least on that level, Luffy said, bored and making Nezumi pause and then pale drastically. Garp, Marine Vice Admiral Garp the Fist. He trained you? Nezumi asked, gulping hard and making Luffy give him an innocent smile that was caught by the Marine photographer. Oh, you know Gramps. Yeah, he's been training me since I was little. When you see or call him, make sure to tell him that I'm definitely going to be Pirate King. After all, who else would be the captain of the greatest swordsman? Luffy asked, grinning and making the Marines stare at Zoro, who was slowly standing, his scars and missing ear giving him a dangerous appearance as he cracked his neck. Greatest swordsman? Nezumi asked weakly and making Zoro grin a bit savagely. He paid no attention to the Marine that snapped a photo of him at that moment, the sword necklace that Mihawk always wore also being caught in the shot. You'll find out the next time you weaklings try and get a hold of Mihawk, Zoro said with a dark grin and making Brulee smack him upside the head. You lost an ear, almost lost part of your jaw, and are still low on blood until we can get more donors of your blood type. Sit down and let me restitch that wound, or else you will bleed out, you demon mutt. Brulee scolded the swordsman, who sighed heavily and sat back down. Be careful, I bite, Zoro said, taking a mock snap at her fingers and causing Luffy to turn and glare at his swordsman. Down boy, bad dog. The only one allowed to bite me is Luffy, Brulee scolded as she smacked Zoro on the head again, this time with a rolled-up newspaper that Nami handed her, and earning looks of disbelief from the swordsman while Usopp busted out laughing. Zoro ... Are you flirting with my wife? Luffy asked, narrowing his eyes at his swordsman, who tensed but shook his head. No, Captain, I was joking, Zoro said, sweating a bit. He was strong, he knew ... but he also knew that Luffy was stronger, and when it came to Brulee he did not want to be on his captain's bad side. Good boy, Luffy said with a smile as he patted Zoro's head, making Sanji and Nami bust out laughing as well. You're going to be hunted so much once I put this bounty on your head, Nezumi cried, making Brulee turn to him and raise her arms. In both outstretched hands, mirrors formed and began to float up in the air a bit, although with the way she formed them it looked more like they were precious stones, or rather crystals. Make sure you tell them to send at least a vice admiral, or else they won't stand a chance, and none of those weak newly trained ones either. Send out the ones for New World pirates after all. Here Brulee tilted her masked head a bit as the photographer got a good picture of her with the crystals around her floating slightly. It was a very draining and advanced trick she learned, but it sure was useful for intimidating people. Nezumi fainted at her next words. We aren't used to such weak opponents. Hey, want to see me scare the hell out of a bunch of low-class weaklings and also shock a Marine captain? Luffy suddenly asked, looking at Brulee as the crew docked at Logtown, their new bounty posters having just came out. Zoro didn't have Pirate Hunter on his anymore. Instead it was Demon Mutt with a bounty of 70,000 due to his claim of defeating Mihawk, which the Marines were still trying to get information on. Luffy's was still Straw Hat ... but now it reads Straw Hat Demon King, and he had a starting bounty of 90,000 since he was Zoro's captain and trained by such a legendary Marine. Brulee also had a bounty in her crystal disguise, in which her face and hair was completely hidden by her mask. She was known as Crystal Copycat, and her bounty was a starting of only 30,000 since the Marines didn't really see her do much, only say something that frightened them like crazy. Of course, Brulee answered, making Luffy grin as he grabbed her hand and pulled her towards the square where the execution stand stood as the others took off to get the things they needed for the trip. Nami being sure to pick up several spare log poses. Don't worry, I promise that nothing bad will happen to me, Luffy whispered to Brulee before he climbed the stand and let himself get caught by Buggy again. Alvida, sorry but I already have a wife, Luffy said, looking at Alvida as if she were crazy when she spoke about how she wanted to make Luffy her man after he hit her. Any last words, Straw Hat? Buggy asked with a laugh while, despite what Luffy had told her, Brulee began to tense and get ready to intervene. She was not going to lose her husband. I am the man who will become the king of pirates, Luffy shouted, stunning the audience with the audacity he had to say that in this town of all places. Really, Luffy? Sanji asked, lighting a cigarette as he and Zoro arrived on scene, causing all of the civilians to run for it while the time travelers sensed the marines that were now surrounding the square. You let them catch you for shits and giggles, didn't you? Zoro asked, making Luffy grin wider at his first mate. The two men sighed as they began to fight their way through the crowd, Brulee not bothering to, since none of them were approaching her, and instead she trusted her husband. Her eyes widened as the sword began to fall towards her husband's unprotected neck, and her body tensed as she got ready to launch a mirror to knock the blade from Buggy's hands. Don't, just trust us. There's a reason we didn't knock down the pillar yet, Zoro whispered to Brulee, who paused and then relaxed. Zoro, Sanji, Usopp, Nami, my love, sorry but I'm dead, Luffy said, grinning happily as he looked up at them, making Brulee jolt as if she had been zapped with lightning as she took a step forward without conscious thought, her hand reaching towards her husband. In the blink of an eye, a large lightning bolt slammed down onto the stand, causing it to catch on fire as it collapsed to the ground. Relaxing a bit, Brulee knew her husband was immune to lightning and blunt damage like that, and so she took stock of the others' reactions. Zoro and Sanji didn't seem surprising. The rest of the pirates around the square, however. I'm still alive. That's nice. Luffy laughed it off as he picked up his hat and placed it on his head. If you ever worry me like that again, I'm going to make you sleep in a cell room by yourself, Brulee said, trying to stop her hands from shaking as she grabbed Luffy by his vest and pulled him into a full-on kiss on the lips. I told you that I'd be fine. Now come on, let's get out of here, Luffy said, laughing as he picked Brulee up bridal style easily, earning a squeak and cherry red blush from the woman, and then dashed off with Zoro and Sanji not far behind him. Let's go, Captain, Zoro said, knocking all of the pirates and marines around them out of the way with a single flying slash that had a few blanching in horror. Zoro, you're mine, Tashigi said, making Brulee raise an eyebrow as the swordswoman tried to stop them. Zoro, how come you never introduced me to your girlfriend? Brulee called as she quickly formed her mask over her face before any of the marines could see and take a picture of her. Zoro didn't blush, but he did get a bit flustered, while Tashigi had a full-on blush that quickly turned to rage as she lunged for Zoro's throat. Straw Hat, Luffy, Crystal Copycat, you two are coming with me, Smoker said as he tried to stop the two from advancing towards the ship, causing the couple to look at him and then at each other. No thanks, I'd rather get back to the ship and cuddle with my husband, Brulee said casually, her voice echoing again as Luffy set her down on her feet, and even Smoker paused for a second when he noticed that she was more than twice his size. Just cuddle? Luffy asked, pouting up at his wife, who just smiled at him and blushed a bit. Not that they knew that, of course. Nothing past light fun until after we make it to Fishman Island, dear. And that's at the least. Although I may make a few exceptions depending on how well you do in battle or other such factors, Brulee said, making Luffy grin eagerly as he began bouncing on his toes. So if I kick Smokey's ass? Luffy asked, his eyes bright and making Brulee chuckle. She was the only one who knew of and could actually use the second way of motivating Luffy to end a fight quickly. I'll let you go under my shirt, but we aren't doing anything heavy for a while. Don't want to risk an accidental pregnancy, Brulee said, while Smoker's eyebrow twitched at how they were so casually dismissing him while he was standing right there. I thought you wanted kids, Luffy asked, tilting his head confused and making Brulee shrug slightly. I do, but not at the moment. I don't want the baby to be in a lot of danger with all the fights and all we're probably going to get into soon, Brulee said, recalling that her husband and his crew told her about a war in Alabasta and Skypedia at the least. If she got pregnant before those were done, then she would be very vulnerable and unable to help her family and husband. If she had the baby before then the baby would be very fragile and vulnerable during the fighting, and she didn't want that. Unlike her mother, she wanted to actually protect and love her children, not just throw them in the deep end of the sea and see if they sink or swim alone. Don't think you'll escape, Smoker yelled as he tried to attack the couple while they were distracted, only to be knocked out by Luffy's pitch-black fist hitting him soundly in the cheek. Okay, so we can start trying for kids once we hit Fishman Island, Luffy asked as he and Brulee began walking back to the ship, unbothered by the out-cold captain they left behind. That's when we'll try, but if we have fun and there's a result, then we'll still keep the baby. We just have to be a lot more careful, Brulee said, earning a grin and nod from Luffy, who paused when he saw the hooded figure on the road in front of them. Brulee paused as well and looked a bit tense at the sight of the most wanted man in the world, only for her jaw to drop open slightly. Oh, Luffy was so in the doghouse for not telling her about this earlier. "Oh hey Dad, come to see me and my wife off." Brulee sighed slightly as she was sat attending another one of her mother's tea parties at the Shadow with her siblings and several of her mother's underworld contacts, as well as whoever else that was deemed good or important enough to invite. Honestly, Brulee would much rather be back on the Mary with her husband and his crew at the moment. They were heading down the reverse mountain now if what Nami said was right. "Have you seen the new bounty posters that just came out the other day?" The Queen of Pleasure City, Stussy, asked casually as she sat at a table with the other underworlders and a few of the Charlotte siblings. "Haven't had time to look at them yet. Anyone good?" Drug Pelko asked, while Brulee's interest was piqued a bit as she wondered if they were talking about her crew or one of the others of the worst generation. "Oh, I brought a copy of the paper and the bounties with me if Big Mom doesn't mind me reading it aloud," Stussy asked, looking towards their host and Brulee's mother, who gave a small laugh. "I could care less about weaklings, but if there is anyone of interest, then go ahead," Big Mom said, making Stussy pull the newspaper out from while Brulee wasn't really sure where she pulled it from, nor did she want to know, but anyways she opened it up to the correct page and laid the posters out for the whole table to see. "It's a rookie crew from the East Blue, but there are some reasons why they seem to be dangerous enough to catch the eye of even New World pirates," Stussy said, smiling pleasantly as she noticed the attention from the other underworld brokers and the Big Mom pirates. "Like who?" Prospero asked, his interest piqued as he had been walking by the table with Brulee at the time and noticed his sister's distraction. "Well, first is the one that no one actually knows much about. Crystal Copycat. It seems she's eaten a crystal-type devil fruit that lets her copy things apparently. There's not much on her other than the fact that she's female and not the captain. Instead, it seems that the captain is her husband. What's really interesting about her is that she always seems to wear a mask of crystals and that she's apparently from the Grand Line, or rather the New World," Stussy said, making everyone who heard her look surprised as they looked at the woman's bounty poster, Brulee smirking a bit when she noticed the shock and surprise on their faces. "Impossible. One of us would have heard about such a powerful person, especially if they left the New World," Dewfield said, looking at the poster and earning a small hum from Stussy. "Perhaps we had and didn't realize it. After all, she's wearing a mask that completely obscures her features from view. With her height, it's possible that she's a long leg from outside of Tottleland that made her way to East Blue for some reason. She is said to be over 10 feet tall after all," Stussy said without looking up from the newspaper and making Brulee give a slightly wider smirk. "So no one suspected her, huh? Good to know. It's be interesting to see how she fares against Brulee." "Copying versus reflection," Prospero mused as he looked at his sister, who arranged her face into an interested look as well as she looked at her bounty poster. It was a good picture at least, showing her mask and impressive height while also capturing the crystals that were floating around her. She had been exhausted for 2 hours after they had left Orange Town until she got something to eat and a nap. But it was so worth it looking at her picture. Crystal's bounty is 30 million, since she wasn't really seen doing much but instead is still believed to be a threat. No one knows if Crystal is actually her name, however, Stussy finished up before moving over to the next bounty poster and glancing up at Big Mom. "One of your children is quite the swordsman, correct? I believe they'd be very interested in the next bounty," Stussy said, making Big Mom hum slightly while even more of the Charlotte siblings began to wonder over curiously. "A few of my children have taken up sword wielding, but the strongest of them is Ammon, my third daughter." "Ammon, come here," Big Mom said, making the snake-neck woman walk over immediately, her cigarette still in her mouth. Honestly, Brulee swore that her sister went through 3 packs of cigarettes a day since she was never seen without one. "Yes, Mama?" Ammon asked, looking at her mother with her normal disinterested and bland look in her eyes. "Stussy," Big Mom prompted the woman, who tapped the picture of Zoro next. His picture was pretty simple but dangerous looking. You could see the scar over his eye and jaw and the fact that one ear was missing as he gave a savage dark grin that had some of the weaker-willed ones shivering slightly as he held up a sword with a white blade. Brulee wasn't sure if it was the way the picture was taken or the fact that he had reopened some of his stitches, but it seemed as if his teeth were bloody. "Demon Mutrorona Zoro with a bounty of 70 million. Says he's the swordsman of the pirate crew, and he along with one other took down an entire crew of fishmen without even trying. What's really interesting about him is that he's apparently a well-known bounty hunter in East Blue but has changed to a pirate himself. Also he claims to have faced Mihawk in battle and and none of the Marines have been able to get in touch with Mihawk since Zoro appeared. Some fear that he is the new greatest swordsman," Stussy said, making Ammon tense and place one hand on her sword hilt while the rest of the table and even Big Mom looked shocked. "Is that so?" Ammon asked, blowing out a trail of smoke as she narrowed her eyes at the poster. "His title is Demon Mud is because the Marines at the scene reported that he is like a merciless demon that never stops until his prey is dead. The Mutt part comes from the fact that he seems unwaveringly loyal to his captain and even his captain's wife. A rabid dog that bites and kills all in his master's way," Stussy said, still not looking up from the newspaper and showing them her smirk. "These pirates were interesting. Loyalty like that is hard to find, especially amongst newer pirates, Capote said softly as she stood beside Prospero while Katakuri was on Brulee's other side. If there's any truth to him beating Mihawk, then not only will we have to see about getting him here to face Ammon in a sword fight ... but if he's strong enough we might have finally found Ammon a worthy husband. Big Mom said, laughing and making Ammon blush just a little bit as she looked away from everyone, making Brulee snicker slightly at her sister. You said that he's not the captain? Yumet asked, making Stussy nod and move to the final picture, the one of Luffy. That's right. Monkey D. Luffy aka Straw Hat Demon King Luffy, worth 90 million. He's the captain and Crystal Copycat's husband. It says here that he took down all of the pirates of note in the East Blue. Has a devil fruit that no one is quite sure what it is exactly yet. Took down Arlong the Fishman with one move, and was trained by his grandfather, a Marine Vice Admiral, from a young age, Stussy said, tapping one slender finger on the picture on the bounty poster. Straw Hat is referring to the hat he wears and the name of his crew, the Straw Hat Pirates, while the Demon King comes from the fact that he seems to be the master of the demon mud. Of course his bounty is likely to go up soon, Stussy said, pretending to read the next bit from the paper when in reality she had used her contacts to gather this information before it could hit the news. It's already pretty impressive for a rookie from that sea. How could it go up more before he hits the Grand Line? Oven asked, raising an eyebrow at the Queen of Horrors. Well, it seems Buggy the Clown and Iron Mace Alvida joined their crews together to attempt to execute him at Louge Town just yesterday. They managed to catch him unaware as he was sitting on the execution platform and slap him with sea stone. Normally this wouldn't be of any interest, however ... it seems that when asked if he had any last words, he shouted that he was going to become the Pirate King, Stussy said, ignoring the sounds of shock or disbelief from around her. Even the Big Mom pirates were surprised at this. To say it in that town, the kid must have balls of steel, Chiverson said, nearly choking on his drink at hearing that news. Brulee had to keep from grinning. They weren't made of steel, but they were definitely impressive and could stretch, just before the blade could separate his head from his neck. Luffy said something else. He called out his crew members' names, referring to Crystal only as his love, and apologized before saying that he was dead with a smile on his face. I'm sure someone will have a picture of that in the news tomorrow, Stussy said, while Brulee had to fight from tensing at being reminded at how she had almost lost her husband. So the kid obviously escaped, right? Did his crew save him? Deifuku asked, while Katakuri's mouth dropped open a bit. You can't be serious, Katakuri said just before Stussy answered, unbothered by the interruption. No, they didn't have to, although they were on scene and looked more amused than anything. The blade was about to hit his neck when the platform was struck by lightning, whereas Buggy the Clown was fried, but still alive, and the platform caught on fire and collapsed. Luffy the Straw Hat Demon King was completely unharmed, Stussy said, making jaws drop open slightly around the table as they stared at the picture of the innocently smiling boy in the tattered old straw hat. How? Prospero gaped in disbelief, earning an appreciative look from Stussy for his tongue. He'd definitely make some girl really happy. As I mentioned, no one is quite sure what his devil fruit is. He was able to stretch his body without damage, is able to literally send bullets back at the people who shot him without a scratch, is unaffected by lightning or blunt force damage, and during the fight with Arlong he lit his arms on fire. No one is quite sure what kind of devil fruit he ate, but the most common theory is a loja of some type, Stussy said before she folded up the newspaper easily. He does sound powerful for a rookie. Perhaps if he gets even stronger or more interesting, then he might make a decent husband for one of my daughters, Big Mom said, laughing a bit and making Brulee tense ever so slightly, but neither of her brothers on either side of her thought anything of it. They knew she had a hard time showing any kind of romantic feelings and such, so to hear that her or one of her sisters might be married off to the boy. Prospero just put a hand on her shoulder in a silent show of support. Of course, Brulee nearly lost her composure and lunged at Galette when the horned redhead leaned forward to get a closer look at the picture and hummed out her appraisal. Doesn't hurt that he's kinda cute in a clueless idiot way. Hey Ace, what was your little brother's name again? Marco the Phoenix asked almost casually as he stared at something in the paper, making the crew around them groan slightly while the pyromaniac in question perked up happily. Oh, you mean Luffy? His name's Monkey D. Luffy. He's a bit of a crybaby and not very strong, but he's the most adorable baby brother ever, and he's so useless on his own it's kinda cute. He's also really clueless like a little kid, Ace said, his brother complex showing itself as he happily chatted about his precious baby brother for about 2 minutes. Why? Ace asked, looking at Marco after he was done, the flaming chicken getting more than a few glares from his other brothers and sisters for getting Ace started. Oh, no reason. I'm just looking at his record-breaking first bounty, Marco said as casually as he could, and making Ace pause as he processed that information in his mind before he nearly flew over to look at the bounty that Marco was now holding up. 90 million. What the fuck did you do, Luffy? Ace asked, shocked as he stared at the bounty that dwarfed his first one. His weak, innocent little adorable crybaby of a brother had such a record-breaking first bounty. Seriously, had he attacked a secure marine facility by accident or something, because this was ridiculous? Someone must have hit him on the head or something and made him dangerous, or maybe they framed him. Who hurt my baby brother? I'll burn them alive. How dare someone hurt or frame my weak crybaby adorable baby brother? Ace ranted for a solid 10 minutes on the things he was going to do to the person who dared hurt or frame his beloved baby brother. Why didn't you tell us he was married though? We could have sent a wedding gift. Marco asked mildly a few minutes into the rant, when Ace paused to take in a breath in order to keep going, only to make Ace freeze for a moment at that while Marco held up the bounty poster for Brulee, or rather Crystal. At the look on the local pyromaniac's face, all the other pirates aside from the veterans, which mainly were the commanders, ran and ducked for cover. The commanders just grabbed the spare blankets and loaded up several buckets of water to be used as fire extinguishers. Ace's shout seemed to be heard clear to Whole Cake Island as he nearly set the Moby Dick on fire. What the fuck, Luffy? Why the fuck are you married? Even Whitebeard was surprised at just how loud Ace's voice had been at that moment. $$, $#line break $% $%. Got him, Nick. Garp, stop laughing. Sengoku yelled at his old friend, who was laughing uproariously at the reactions his grandson was getting for his first bounty. Garp couldn't really help his bouts of loud, boisterous laughter at the fucking looks on the other vice admirals' faces, especially at the fact that his swordsman, the demon mutt, might have actually killed Mihawk. They were still trying to get in contact with the elusive warlord. Your grandson is a pirate, Garp. A very dangerous one who you trained. I fail to see how this is funny. Sengoku shouted at Garp, who busted out laughing again. It's funny because there's no way any of that is true. Sure, Luffy's a decent strength for his age, but my adorable grandson is still a weak little crybaby, Garp said after he settled down his laughter for a moment, but he was still grinning. Oh, he's headstrong and able to take quite the beating, but last time I saw him he wasn't even as strong as Ace was when he left, and I doubt he's gotten much stronger since then. He probably just pissed off the marine that called in that bounty. He's very good at making people mad at him, you know. But he's cute enough that he gets away with it most of the time back on Dawn Island, with just a few angry words and a grumble or two from the one he made mad. Did I tell you about the time where he was 12 and— Shut up. Sengoku immediately wadded up a piece of paper, a boring request from Akenu that he would have rejected immediately either way, and shoved it in Garp's open mouth before he could get started. The man may be an honored and highly celebrated marine ... but damn it if he didn't outright traumatize people whenever he would talk about his cute little grandson. Hey, they have his wife's bounty poster too. One of Garp's newest trainees, a pink-haired boy who apparently had been saved by Luffy and recommended for his grandpa's training as a replacement according to the messy note Luffy had left with the boy, said, looking at the bounty poster for a tall woman. Wife? Garp asked, all laughter gone immediately as he whirled around to stare at the pink-haired boy. Yes, sir. She's wearing a mask now for some reason, but I recognize her outfit and she looks as tall as Luffy-san's wife was when they saved me. I never really caught her name though, or if I did then I'm afraid I can't recall it at the moment, Kobe said, nodding his head as he offered the bounty poster. I saw her disappear into one of her crystals for some reason when we were getting off of Alvida's boat. I don't know how she did it. I thought Luffy said something about a mirror, but perhaps I'm mistaken, Kobe said as Garp took the poster right out of his hands and stared at the masked woman. He must like them big, just like his old man, Garp said, beginning to howl in laughter while Sengoku frowned as he thought about what Kobe had said. Mirrors. Why did that seem familiar? Hadn't they learned that the mirror fruit had fallen into the hands of a Yonko quite a long while back? He'd have to go through the records and see. Wonder if they'll have kids anytime soon. I'm gonna head for paradise and meet up with my grandson Sengoku, Garp said before he began to leave the room, snapping Sengoku out of his thoughts. Oh no you don't, Garp. Get back here, damn it, Sengoku yelled, chasing after his old friend to hold him down if he must. He was not letting his destructive, one of his best, marines go and meet up with a seemingly just as destructive, dangerous pirate, grandson or not. Sengoku's shout seemed to be heard all across the island they were all on at the moment. Get up. I'm surprised your #1 fanboy didn't try to beg us to let him join us right now, Nami said, looking at Luffy as they were sailing just down the Twin Capes. They were making sure that they could reassure both Crocus and Laboon that Brook was still out there and he was just stuck at the moment, but he hadn't forgotten them. Even after he and his crew had died, he hadn't forgotten his promise. Hubardi. He met up with me and Brulee after we dealt with Smoker. He said he wanted to join us but wanted to wait until he had the rest of his crew back with him again, as well as his ship. Something about not wanting to be a burden? Luffy asked, more than said the last bit with his head tilted to the side, using the shortened name for the cannibal that they came up with after needing something faster and easier to call him while either drunk or injured. Of course he did. Here comes Laboon, guys, Zoro said with a sigh, recalling the fanboy who annoyed the crap out of him but was almost as loyal to Luffy as the main crew was. It was something to see. The looks on the Marines' faces when they realized that Luffy had a whole fleet of people ready to fight for him at a moment's notice. And more than a few of the fleet were ready to die for their commander at a second's notice as well. Oh, and the flower guy too, Luffy said, making sure to use haki in order to subdue Laboon this time. That way he didn't hurt his giant whale friend or his ship by damaging it. What do you mean? They never abandoned Laboon. Their crew died, but Brook still lives on. He's trapped at the moment, but don't worry. We'll set him free, Luffy said, smiling at Crocus after having been told about the Rumbar pirates and how they had left Laboon behind. Even though Crocus never said the name of the crew. Oh, Luffy, Miss Wednesday, or rather Vivi said, happy to see her friends and crew again even though she was still tied up in the whale's belly. Vivi, Nami said, smiling as she went over to hug her friend and the ally of the Straw Hats. Any clue what's going on? 1 minute I'm helping you guys get to Raftel. The next I'm back working for the Sandman again, Vivi asked as they untied her easily, Nami being the first to give her friend a hug. Time travel, but it seems that only Nakama remember, Nami said, making Vivi pause and give the crew a flat look. Normally I'd say that it's impossible, but this is you guys I'm talking about. Hey Chopper, Luffy yelled as soon as they were allowed on Drum Island, thankfully without Nami being sick this time. Captain, a childish voice yelled as a large blue-nosed reindeer came dashing towards Luffy with his horns down as if to impale the Straw Hat captain. A few villagers screamed out in fear or horror as the boy just stayed right where he was with a huge grin on his face. I missed you, Chopper said, changing back to his brain point a second before he would have ran Luffy through, jumping into his captain's arms with a few tears and a smile almost as wide as Luffy's own. We missed you too, buddy. Guess who's traveling with us this time? Luffy asked as Brulee stepped up beside her fiancé and smiled warmly at Chopper, her helmet and mask gone for the moment since Nami, Vivi, and Sanji had told her that Drum Island would be safe from Marines, especially with what the original Straw Hats had planned. Brulee, Chopper cried happily as he jumped into the tall woman's arms, earning a soft smile and warm hug from the tallest of their crew, one of the two who were protective and motherly to him, or well, more protective than normal at least. Hey there, my fluffy little doctor. How have you been? Anyone giving you troubles? Brulee asked softly, although she shot pointed glares at the people around her who were staring in horror or muttering to themselves about a monster. You're going into mama mode, Brulee, Nami said, her voice teasing a bit and earning a small blush from the mirror woman. So, Chopper doesn't mind, and it's good practice for when Luffy and I start trying for kids, Brulee said, her cheeks stained pink as she looked away from everyone. Brulee was the biggest mother hen to those she was close to, or those she deemed as cute, and the others on the crew aside from Luffy loved teasing her for being a mama bear over everyone, but especially Chopper. It was all meant in good fun and she knew it, after the first couple of times at least. But it was always kind of funny to watch her turn different colors of red and stutter out some excuse or another. We can start whenever you want, dear, Luffy reminded Brulee with a grin, making her turn bright red and duck her head, not looking at anyone as she nuzzled Chopper, who was giggling at her. Shut up, Luffy, Brulee said, earning a laugh from her husband-to-be. Yes, dear, Luffy said with a grin, making Brulee turn even redder. Remind me to ask Frankie to build them their own room away from everyone else, Nami told Sanji with a grin, earning a snort from Zoro. What do you think about us putting Drum Island under our protection? Luffy asked, looking at Kira and Dalton, who had been rushing after Chopper, worried only to have stopped at the sight of the pirates that welcomed the little reindeer with happiness and affection. Why would you do something like that? Kira had demanded as she stared at the pirates, who smiled slightly as Luffy plucked Chopper from Brulee's arms. This is Chopper's home. I already put Nami and Sanji's homes under my protection, while Zoro, Bru-chan, and my own homes are already under someone else's protection, so why would I leave Chopper's defenseless? Luffy asked with a grin as he cuddled Chopper, who nuzzled his neck happily. How do you know, my boy? Kira had demanded as she stepped forward, and her grip on the bottle of liquor in her hand looked more threatening than it should to the civilian. He's our crew's doctor, Luffy said with a bright grin, and making Kira narrow her eyes for a moment before she began chuckling as she relaxed a bit. Ah, so you're the ones he told me about from that dream of his. If that's the case, then it's nice to meet you, but you'd better take care of my boy, Kira said with a smirk as her body lost its threatening tension that even the civilians had picked up on. We're Straw Hats, we protect our own, Nami said, smirking slightly as she twirled her climate baton expertly, even while eyeing some of the villagers nearby who were staring at Chopper in horror or confusion. Usopp? Luffy asked, looking back at the sniper, who immediately nodded and pulled a flag with the Straw Hats symbol on it out of his ever-present pouch of supplies. All the Straw Hats immediately backed up to stand behind their captain aside from Usopp and Brulee. Right here. Got about 4 more left, so I'll start making more when we get back on the ship, Usopp said, making Luffy nod as he took the flag and handed it to Dalton and Kira while Usopp backed up to be in line with the others. Just put this up somewhere on a pole so that it shows this island is under our protection, Brulee, Luffy asked, looking at his fiancée who stood next to him and put her hands together for a moment. The island people, including Dalton but not including Kira, stared shocked as the tall woman focused for a moment before pulling her hands apart and allowing a good-sized mirror with a simple steel frame to form. "This is one of my special mirrors. Set it up somewhere where you can reach it easily but where there is plenty of room for us to come out," Brulee said, handing it over to Dalton, who looked confused but less so than some of the villagers. "Come out?" one woman asked, making Brulee grin as she looked at Luffy, who chuckled and nodded. "Show em," Luffy said, making Brulee summon another smaller mirror to her hands that she tossed lightly to the woman, who caught it. Everyone looked at the mirror confused since there wasn't anything special about it that they could see, but they grasped when they looked back at Brulee only to find her gone. "I love it when she does this to someone else," Nami said with a chuckle, while Vivi looked just as surprised and confused as the villagers. "Look at the mirror," Luffy advised the woman, who looked back at the mirror in her hands only to scream and drop it. "That never gets old," Brulee said with a cackle as she rose from the mirror, making more than a few of the villagers scream or shout in shock. "I ate the mirror fruit. The mirrors are my domain," Brulee said as she dropped back into the mirror she just rose from, only to appear in and walk out of the mirror in Dalton's hands. "That mirror is a communication mirror that links up to the mirrors that usually make up my helmet. If you need anything, just say Straw Hat into it and I'll hear it. If there's an emergency, just say Big Mom and we'll know to come through immediately prepared for a fight," Brulee said, causing Kira to look at her sharply at that name. The Yonko, would she be upset with that code phrase? Kira asked, earning a smirk from the tall purple-haired woman. "Don't see why she would be," Brulee said, shrugging her shoulders slightly before shivering and pulling her green coat closer. "Wouldn't she be mad that you're using her name?" Kira asked, earning a chuckle from Brulee. "Big Mom's real name is Charlotte Linlin." "My name is Charlotte Brulee," Brulee said, watching amused as most of the people that put the pieces together pale and stare in shock and disbelief. Even Kira was gaping in disbelief at Brulee's next words, while Luffy laughed at their faces. "Mama doesn't mind us using her name as a signal at all. In fact, she encourages it back home." "Hey, have you been hearing the rumors coming out of New World?" Stussy asked, looking at Morgans during another one of Big Mom's tea parties. This one was to openly acknowledge her eldest great-grandchild as a member of the Big Mom Pirates for her birthday. 10-year-old Pippin was standing over by her grandmother, Compote, being introduced to several other people, while Compote's eldest daughter Peach hovered almost protectively around her daughter. "What rumors?" Drug Felko asked curiously. He knew Stussy never mentioned something unless it was interesting or important in some way. "There are rumors that Copycat Crystal belongs to the Charlotte family," Stussy said, making those near her gasp or recoil, while the Charlottes that heard her were surprised and shocked. "What are you talking about?" Big Mom demanded, with her voice a good bit darker than it was just a few minutes ago. "There are rumors and stories floating around Paradise. When the Straw Hat Pirates put an island named Drum under their protection, they set up some method of communication between the island leader and the Straw Hats using Crystal's powers somehow. Crystal said if they needed help in an emergency, then to just say Big Mom into the communication line and the whole crew would be there as fast as possible," Stussy said, making the group stare at her. When one of the leaders of the island asked if you would be offended by that, Crystal said that there was no reason why you should be, since your name is Charlotte Linlin and her family name is Charlotte as well. She was even heard calling you her mama, Stussy said, causing Brulee's eyes to widen slightly since she had wandered over with Amand at the looks of shock and disbelief on her siblings' faces. "How do you get this information?" Brulee asked aloud by accident, but glancing around it didn't seem like anyone thought anything of the question. "Of course you would ask that. You're the best spy in the family after all." In fact, Oven just seemed amused, as if he expected the question. "Well, my girls go all over the world, and when they travel they hear things. They all know by now to report anything I might deem of interest straight to me immediately." Stussy waved the question off with a giggle. "So one of my sisters could be a traitor. Are we sure that this crystal person isn't just Lola in disguise?" Deifuku asked with a sneer and crossing his arms over his chest. "Idiot. The body shape and size is all wrong for Lola," Amand said, rolling her eyes at her elder brother. "She's the only one that's unaccounted for and still alive," Deifuku said, glaring at the snake neck, who just released a plume of smoke in his direction. "How would any of our siblings gone from here to the New World without us knowing? Or to the East Blue?" Prospero was the one to ask that, and making a few of the siblings glance at Brulee. She was the only one who could vanish without leaving a trace and go across islands. "Why are you idiots looking at me? Do I look like a traitor to Mama?" Brulee demanded as she glared at the siblings looking at her suspiciously. "You're the only one who can go across islands without being seen," Citron said, moving to grab her sword. Cinnamon already pulled hers out and was swinging it towards Brulee. "I'd stop accusing without proof if I were you." Amand set her own sword out and knocking Cinnamon's aside without any effort. "Until you are sure our sister here is the traitor, you won't get to her." Here Amanda tilted her head up just enough where her younger siblings saw a single glowing light green colored eye peeking out from under the wide brim of her hat. "Without going through me, Ammon finished darkly as she tightened her grip on her sword with her left hand while her right was holding the sheath. Are Auntie Cinnamon and Auntie Ammon going to have a sword fight, Granny? Pippin asked, looking excited as she stared at the two who had their swords out. Maybe for your birthday to show you what a real swordswoman could do, but we need both my mama and your granny and mama's permission first, okay, Pip-chan? Ammon asked, smiling warmly over at Pippin, who looked excited and hopeful. Don't take your eyes off Cinnamon and Citron moved to strike Ammon at the same time but were blocked by Brulee's side. Perhaps you two can calm down and not ruin Pippin's birthday. Brulee hisses at the two long legs as she twisted her scythe in a move she learned years ago, disarming her two sisters easily. Cool. How did you do that, Auntie Brulee? Pippin asked, wide-eyed and starry-eyed as she stared up at her grandmother's younger sister. Aunt Brulee used to train with Aunt Ammon every day. She's learned a few tricks to use against sword wielders. I might teach you a few once you decide what weapon suits your fighting style best, Brulee said, smiling gently at the star-struck little girl. Cool, Pippin said brightly before Compote ushered her granddaughter away over to Prospero, who was entertaining the younger members of the family. Now if you're done with baseless accusations and unprovoked attacks, maybe we can talk civilly like family should, Brulee asked, her voice frigid as she stared down her sisters, who had the grace to look at least a little sheepish. Good to see your skills haven't rusted, Ammon said, smirking at her sister as she resheathed her sword. Now since you two will actually listen for a minute. Brulee has been with me for the past week making sure I don't injure myself further, Ammon said, and it took all of Brulee's ability to pretend that this wasn't new information to her, as if she already knew it. The pirate attack on Nuts Island 2 weeks ago left me with a wound to my side thanks to one of the pirates pretending to be dead until I was done slaughtering the others. I refused to go to the infirmary and she found me when I started bleeding again. She insisted on making sure I didn't harm myself further by accident and lack of wound care. Ammon was lying through her teeth for the most part. In the last timeline she hadn't been injured in the attack. In this one though. Moving that fast hasn't torn your stitches, has it? Brulee demanded, looking at her elder sister sharply. She had gotten back to Toddleland 4 days ago, and on her first day back she had noticed the bloodstain on Ammon's dress. That's when her mother hen tendencies got the best of her. What do you mean? Oven asked, looking at the swordswoman alarmed and worried. Pulling up the shirt she had chosen to wear because of her wound, she showed the stitched-up stab wound in the left side of her stomach just under her ribs. Missed my vitals, but Brulee is a mother hen and wanted to make sure I didn't pull the stitches, Ammon said while Big Mom looked furious. Some no-name brats dared attack her and hurt one of my children. Find out if there were any who weren't there when Ammon finished them off and get rid of them, Big Mom ordered her children, who nodded and moved away. Sister Ammon ... Why? Brulee asked her sister in a whisper when they had moved away from the others and from the homies. Because you're my precious sister. I want to meet him, however, Ammon said, smiling slightly down at Brulee, who blinked up at her for a second. Meet him? Brulee asked softly and earning a smirk from Ammon, who leaned down just a bit to whisper something directly to her sister's ear. Brulee went bright red in the face at that and spluttered while Ammon giggled at her reaction. The man who stole my sister's heart and married her must be a hell of a man. Luffy, I'm back and I brought company, Brulee called out as soon as she emerged from the mirror in her and Luffy's room, keeping one hand in the mirror until her sister emerged from it. This is your room, Ammon asked, eyeing the rather small space and ducking her head just a bit to keep her hat from hitting the ceiling. Me and Luffy share this room. This is their original ship, the Going Merry. They didn't get the Thousand Sunny until Anai's lobby, I believe, Brulee said, earning a look from her sister for the names and making Brulee shrug slightly. Bru-chan. Luffy had bounded through the door and near tackled Brulee in an instant, but she had expected this and just laughed at his antics as she hugged him back. You're just in time to meet my older brother, Luffy said, grinning widely up at Brulee, who paused at that and looked surprised. She had forgotten that her fiance's brother would still be alive right now. Oh, so your wife is back? Ace asked from the doorway, although his smile was cold and his eyes dark. You got married without me, sis? Ammon asked with a snort at how red Brulee was turning. Ace asked, surprised to see the snake neck woman. Ace, you're the kid's brother. Ammon nearly choked on her cigarette as she stared at the cowboy hat-wearing fireman. Luffy, how do you know Big Mom pirates? Ace asked, looking at his brother in disbelief while Ammon stepped towards him, putting out her cigarette and flicking the butt out the open window. It's one of those things that could only happen to me, Luffy said dryly and earning a look from his brother. That's mildly terrifying, Ace said while Ammon moved as if to hug the fire Loja, only to stop when she remembered her sister was in the room. You can go ahead and kiss him if you want, Ammon. I already know you two are together, and so does the rest of this idiot's crew, Brulee said, smiling reassuringly at her sister, whose head twisted around almost like Luffy's does to stare at her shock. How could you all know? Ammon demanded, staring at her sister in disbelief and shock. Cause we're from the future, Luffy said brightly and as if it should be obvious. Yes, although to be fair to you, we didn't learn about it until 3 years after Ace's death, Brulee said, nodding and putting a supportive hand on Luffy's shoulder as she mentioned his brother's death in the last timeline. Yeah, you needed to escape Big Mom and managed to get a hold of Shanks somehow. And he got you to us with little Sabo, Luffy said as if it explained everything. Sabo, Ace asked, and he felt like his throat had dried up as he heard the name and recalled discussing something with Ammon just a few weeks before. Yeah, Charlotte Portgas de Sabo. Or would his name be Charlotte Gull de Sabo? Luffy asked, tilting his head confused. I have a son, Ace asked quietly as he stared at his brother, who nodded. Sister Ammon was pregnant when you died. She hid it from most all of the family, but thanks to my own powers I knew and helped where I could. We kept it quiet even when I deserted Mama to join Luffy and the Straw Hats. Mama found out sometime after I left though and was going to kill Ammon and Sabo for the betrayal, and so you fled, sister. Killed any chess peacekeeper or part of the crew that wasn't family and managed to get to one of red-haired islands where he got a hold of Luffy, Brulee said softly, and making Ammon look rather faint at that as she stared at her sister before staring at Ace as he stared up at her. When did Ace? When did he? Ammon couldn't even choke out the words as she continued to stare at the man that quickly wrapped his arms around her tall but lean frame and pulled her close. About 5 months from now in the current timeline. 3 years ago in the timeline we're from, Brulee said gently, and Ammon knew this was no prank. Brulee would never be that cruel. You had the baby around 3 months after he died, Brulee said, causing Ammon to suck in a sharp breath as her eyes widened. I promise, I'll figure out who killed me and how, and I'll keep it from happening. I'm not going to abandon you and our baby, Ace said softly to Ammon, whose hand moved to cover her stomach. Ace, she said, I'll give birth 3 months after your death, and your death is in 5 months if things happen like they said it would. That's only 8 out of 9 months, Ammon said softly, and making Ace's eyes widen as they shot to her belly. Which means either I went into labor early, I'm going to get pregnant soon, or I already am pregnant. Ammon continued, making Ace stare up at her before grinning widely. I'm pretty sure it's that last one, sister. You avoided most of the family starting 2 months before Ace's execution, and the few times I did see you before figuring it out you looked either tired or were sick, Brulee said, smiling softly at her sister, who had a few tears in her eyes but a smile on her face. When Mama didn't marry me off by my 25th birthday, and when I stayed single past my 30th birthday, I thought I'd never get to be a mother. Ammon choked out as she stared down at Ace, who stared right back up at her with a wide D smile on his face. Well, we're going to have a baby, Ace said, smiling widely still as he leaned up on his tiptoes to wrap his arms around her long neck and pull her down into a kiss. Yeah, our baby boy, Ammon agreed with a grin of her own as they pulled apart and both of their hands were resting on her flat stomach. And don't worry, Luffy said, stepping towards them with a serious look on his face as they looked over at him. He had the look on his face that was usually reserved for when he faced down armies, and they knew he was going to keep the promise even if it killed him. I won't let Ace die this time. I wasn't strong enough last time, but this time, he'll get to see little Sabo grow up. I promise. How did you all travel back in time, and why for that matter? Ace asked, looking at his little brother while he and Ammon were in the infirmary of the ship, waiting for the little reindeer doctor to finish doing some tests on Ammon's blood, specifically a pregnancy test. Although Ammon already knew it was going to be positive. She had been feeling nauseous and tired recently, and she did get sick just yesterday when she smelled pecan pie. She hoped that part would go away quickly. She did govern Nuts Island, where pecan pie was made several times a day, and she was almost always offered a slice of each pie if she were nearby. Heck if we know. 1 minute we're about to land on Raftel. The next we're all waking up where we were before Luffy recruited us, Brulee said, shrugging her shoulders a bit and making Ammon frown for a second. You said that so far all of your crew, even the non-official members like Princess Vivi, remember everything and have all of their abilities that aren't devil fruit related, but if I joined you all to get away from Mama and protect my son, then how come I don't remember? Ammon asked, making Ace frown as he pulled her closer, dropping one hand to rest protectively over her stomach. Well, you weren't with us for long before we reached Raftel, maybe about 2 weeks. You were still wary around those who didn't attack Whole Cake Island and a bit hostile towards those who did. Even though we considered you part of the crew, you didn't see yourself as part of the crew. That's my best guess, Chopper said from his workstation and earning a nod from Brulee. The only one on the ship you were even comfortable enough with to let Sabo-chan hug were me and Luffy. And even then you kept a close eye on Luffy. You refused to let him stay in the boys' room, and you were even wary of sleeping in the girls' cabin yourself, so we let you two have the captain's cabin, Brulee said, making Ammon frown slightly. They attacked Mama in the island, Ammon asked, tilting her head ever so slightly and earning a snort from Chopper. They were trying to steal Sanji. Sanji's my nakama, Luffy said, smiling as if it were obvious as he stared up at the snake neck woman who stared at him for a moment. Heh, you sure as hell know how to pick them, little sis. Picking a fight with Mama and then managing to escape with their lives. Impressive. I apologize if I cut down any of your crew in the future, Ammon said, quirking a small smile at the boy who grinned at her. Nobody died though, at least none on our side, and not because of us. The most you did was cut that tree guy, but he was alright. Oh, and took the Viver card from Nami. She was really upset about that until you gave it back. Nami's really great friends with Lola and that card's is going to be. Ah, this is so confusing. That card's the symbol of their friendship, Luffy said, making the others in the room laugh at how he got mixed up with the proper way to phrase it. Not that they could blame him. It is confusing. You're going to meet up with Lola? Ammon asked, looking a bit surprised at that and earning a nod from Luffy. I can come get you for that if you want, sis. That way we can both see our little sister again, Brulee offered, earning a nod from Ammon. There was beeping over by Chopper that had everyone looking over as the little doctor seemed to check something and nod to himself. Yep, the test results are exactly what you thought. Congratulations, Chopper said, smiling brightly up at Ammon and Ace, who gave wide grins as they both looked down at her stomach. I told you, Ammon whispered while Ace slipped from the bed he was sitting with her on and kneeled on the floor. Hey there, baby boy. I'm your daddy, Ace said softly as he pressed a kiss to Ammon's stomach, making her blush a bit but smile wider. Flame brain, he can't hear you yet. Wait until the 4th month for that, Ammon said, although her voice was soft as Ace pressed another kiss to her stomach. I can still talk to him a bit. Don't listen to Mommy Sabo. I know you can hear Daddy. You might not understand me yet, but if you're anywhere near as smart as her mommy, you will soon, Ace said, pouting up at Ammon before looking back to her stomach. He will be. It was funny watching him kick Sabo Nyai cause Sabo Nyai was crying over you naming your son after him, Luffy said with a snicker and making Ace frown. Sabo's dead, Luffy, or well, our brother is. The baby isn't, Ace said, making Luffy look at him confused before he recalled something. Oh yeah, you didn't know cause he still had amnesia when you. Sabo Nyai isn't dead. He was saved by Dad and was taken to the revolutionaries. He's their chief of staff, but he had amnesia until after the War of Best, Luffy said, nodding and making Ace's jaw drop open a bit. He's still alive? Ace asked in disbelief and earning a nod from Brulee, Luffy, and Chopper. How we might have to think of a new name for the baby, Ace said, looking at Ammon, who shook her head. We don't have to. Naming the baby after a sibling is a good idea, and besides we already started calling him Sabo in our heads and we both know it, Ammon said, making Ace nod his agreement at her point. So when's the wedding? Brulee asked, raising an eyebrow and smirking at her sister, who blushed a bit. Depends. When's yours? Ammon returned immediately, making Brulee blush brightly at that. Whenever Brulee wants, but we're waiting until the crew is back together again, Luffy said, smiling brightly at that. Oh, so does this mean I'm going to get some little nieces and nephews out of you, Lou? Ace asked, grinning and making Luffy look at Brulee. No, not until after the war, remember? If it happens again, I'm not risking being pregnant during it ... or losing you if I'm pregnant during it, Brulee said immediately and making Luffy nod his head. What she said, Luffy agreed and made his brother stare at him for a moment. She's actually serious and you're listening to her. You don't listen to anyone, Ace said, looking worried about his brother, who frowned confused. No, Sirius is a constellation, she's Brulee, and of course I'm letting her decide. It's her body and she's the one who will be carrying around the baby for almost a year and doing all the hard parts, Luffy said, looking confused while Ace nearly flat out panicked. Now, you know constellations now. What kind of hellish future did you come from? No, don't be all serious and smart, Lou. Go back to being childish and happy and not very bright, Ace said, grabbing his brother's shoulders and shaking him slightly. Did someone hit you in the head and switch your personality or something? Tell me who. I'll flash fry them, Ace demanded while Brulee stared amused before turning to her sister. Ammon's eyebrow twitched and she reached for her cigarettes at her sister's next amusedly stated words. Congrats, sis. You got the one with the brother complex. Where did my cigarettes go? Ammon asked, looking confused when her cigarettes weren't next to her on the bed where she had left them. No smoking, Chopper said seriously, causing Ammon to look over at him, only to see her pack of cigarettes in his hand. How did you even? Ammon questioned, looking from where her cigarettes had been to where they were now. Nami and Robin taught me how to be sneaky, Chopper said, shrugging it off and putting the cigarettes behind him on the table. But no smoking for you anymore. Cigarettes are very bad in general, much less for a pregnant woman, Chopper said seriously as he stared at her, although he wasn't very frightening in his small form. Let me put it like this. If you smoke while pregnant or around a baby, you can cause irreparable harm to the child. You could even cause them to die as a baby because of the damage the cigarettes would do to them while they were in your body. In the time where from you gave up cigarettes after Sabo was born because he had weak lungs from you smoking for the first several months of your pregnancy, Chopper said, making Ammon's mouth, which she had opened to say something, snap shut as her hand flew to her belly. Cigarettes did that to my baby? Ammon asked, her voice a bit softer than normal and making Ace look away, distracted from trying to figure out who made his brother smarter by the tone in her voice. Please, sister, just listen to the doctor about this. You cried yourself to sleep for months after he was born because you blamed yourself. I don't want to see you go through that again. I don't want to see the guilt and horror on your face as you listened to make sure your baby was breathing because of how his lungs were. Brulee said, moving over to sit beside her sister, whose eyes widened at that and she paled drastically. Right, no cigarettes, Ammon said, nodding her head in agreement almost dazedly. Why hadn't she ever realized that cigarette smoke was bad for babies before? She spent plenty of time with her younger siblings and her numerous nieces and nephews while she smoked, and none of them ever seemed to have a problem. Oh, but she had only started smoking 5 years ago as a way to help with her scratching. Most of her siblings and nieces and nephews were beyond the baby and toddler stage by then. Don't worry, we won't let you relapse into smoking, and we won't let Sanji, he's the cook, smoke around you or the baby when Sabo decides to come out either, Luffy said with a smile as he reached over to place a hand on Ammon's shoulder while Ace sat on her other side and hugged her close. Don't worry, this baby is going to be so loved and spoiled. We won't let anything happen to him, Ace said, kissing Ammon's neck as she laid her head down on his. And hey, since Ace isn't going to die this time, maybe Sabo will have a few siblings, huh? Brulee asked, teasing her sister, who smiled slightly at the thought of several beautiful little healthy children running around calling her mommy and the man next to her daddy. Let's wait until Sabo here is with us and see how things go, Ammon said, making Ace give a small hum of agreement as he merely held the older woman close, both of their hands held over her stomach. Speaking of me not dying, how did I die, Luffy? Ace asked, glancing at his brother, who frowned and tilted his hat down a bit. Blackbeard, you got into a fight with him and his crew. They caught you and handed you over to the Marines while exposing you as the Pirate Prince, as the reporters called you afterwards. There was a full-scale war between the Whitebeard Alliance and Marines at Marineford. I broke into Impel Down to try and get you out before that, but was delayed thanks to Magellan. When I broke out, I had over 200 prisoners with me and we assaulted Marineford as well. I managed to free you with some help. But when we retreated, one of the admirals made several remarks about Mustache Austin that pissed you off and you tried to fight him. When you were distracted, he went after me while I wasn't paying attention. You dove in front of me and took a magma fist through your back, Luffy said, summing it all up before he undid the vest he wore to show the burnt scar across his chest. You protected me, but my mind snapped at seeing you die in my arms. I was unresponsive, barely conscious. Even everyone else protected me and got me to safety while Mustache Austin dealt with the Marines. You, Mustache Austin. And I don't even know how many others all died that day, Ace, Luffy said, staring his brother straight in the eye and making Ace pale at the scar on his brother's rubber body, while Ammon frowned and tilted her own hat downward a bit to cover her eyes. But I'm not letting it happen again. I want you to give me the Den Mushy number for Mustache Austin, and then after I free Alabasta from all Sandy, I'm going to give him a call. If he gives me permission, I'm going to kill Blackbeard the minute I see him. If he doesn't, but Blackbeard attacks me first, I'm going to kill him then, Luffy said, his voice dead serious and earning nods from Brulee and Chopper both. If somehow I fail to kill him before you get to him, if you're going to go after him again, that is, just remember he ate a Loja fruit that cancels out other people's powers. The dark fruit leaves his body vulnerable, but it cancels your fire and my rubber and everyone else's devil fruit powers, Luffy advised his brother, who nodded seriously at that, although he pulled Ammon just the slightest bit closer, one hand resting protectively over her belly. Good, now that that's all settled. Here, Luffy grinned as he ran to the doorway. His resulting shout had his brother and Brulee sighing, glad that he was back to normal. Sanji, put out that cigarette around our guest. I'm hungry. Hey Brulee, I have an idea, Luffy said with a grin on his face, causing his fiancée to look horrified. They were resting in the mirror world together, just relaxing for a day before they went to take out Crocodile and save Alabasta again, that is. Ammon had taken the captain's quarters with Ace before Ace left to track down Blackbeard. This I gotta hear before vetoing, Brulee said, earning a pout from her husband-to-be, who then grinned as he explained his idea to her. Brulee was shocked and felt for a fever when she realized that his plan was likely to work and was actually very smart. Her actions had him pouting a bit again, which earned him a kiss that descended into a make-out session. The two separated for air a few minutes later and rested their foreheads together as they tried to catch their breath. When should we do it? You're going to fight Crocodile tomorrow and speak with Whitebeard, Brulee asked, making Luffy grin widely at her for not vetoing it outright like she did most of his plans, especially after his fight with Kaido. After the fight with Crocodile, but before we call Whiteboard, maybe, depending on how things go. Maybe this time we can recruit Smokey. That sword lady Zoro likes to fight, and the cage lady, Luffy said with a grin on his face that nearly screamed mischief. A grin that was soon copied by his wife-to-be, who gave him another kiss for the sneaky side that she loved to see when it came to the man she was going to marry. How about you wait until the day after you beat Crocodile so that I can reward you before you put your plan into action? Brulee's voice dropped teasingly as she ran her sharp nails over his chest, drawing a bit of blood in some spots. It wasn't like he minded. In fact, he thought it was kind of hot how she was always turned on by a bit of blood or violence. Given how often they were in bloody battles, she got horny a lot and he always was happy to satisfy her. Honestly, it was a bit of a miracle that she hadn't been pregnant when they had come back in time. And if my idea works? Luffy asked, his voice dropping as his fingers began to run over her body with surprising gentleness, gently pinching or tickling the spots that he knew would get her breathless after a few seconds. Oh, I can think of a few things, Brulee said, licking her lips as she let out a breathy moan at some of the spots he was touching. I can too, Luffy said with a smirk as he began to nibble on her neck. Brulee gave out a loud, breathless moan as he nibbled in just the right spot and had to quickly put her hand up between them before anything went further. Luffy gave a small whine but stopped his nibbling immediately. Trust me, I want this to go further too, but we have a fight tomorrow. I need to be able to walk without a limp. Wait until after we go through with your idea, Brulee said, panting a bit and trying to calm herself down. Her idiot could always get her raring to go in seconds if he tried or wanted to, and she swore he wound her up sometimes when he knew they couldn't or shouldn't do anything. It certainly made the rewards after the fights a lot more passionate and made a few of their sessions go further than what they had planned. Just kisses and cuddles then? Luffy asked, more than content to have only that if that was all she wanted to give. He knew they were going to have a party after the fight was over. Kisses and cuddles, Brulee agreed as she snuggled close to him stretching his legs out a bit so that he was taller than her. This was her favorite way to sleep after all. Him taller than her so that they could intertwine their legs. She could bury her face in his chest to hear his heartbeat, and his arms could wrap securely around her to keep her close to his body. She wasn't someone who needed protecting, especially not after she had started training with the monster trio, but she loved how he would hold her protectively and shield her from the world that would try and kill them. I love you, Luffy whispered, pressing a kiss to Brulee's mane of purple hair. I love you too, Brulee murmured back with a small blush and embarrassed but happy smile. She didn't really care that by this time tomorrow her future king would have his bounty doubled, at the least, and her own was likely to rise as well. She didn't care that he was going to fight Crocodile. He had beaten the Sandman before. Back when he had been a clueless innocent rookie, he sure as hell could beat the Sandman now. Hell, even Nami and Chopper and Usopp and Carrot could beat the Warlord with ease. It honestly felt more like they were bullying the poor Warlord by letting Luffy fight him. Not that they cared. After all, he had it coming for what he had done to Robin and Vivi last time. Although at this point even Vivi could take him down. The man really did rely on his devil fruit too much, especially against adaptable fighters like Luffy and his crew. It was only on Luffy's orders, for nostalgia's sake, and the possible aid at Impel Down in Marineford later, that Robin hadn't snapped Crocodile's neck the minute she woke up and got into contact with her captain. One of the most defining and near-death moments for us after we entered the Grand Line the first time around, and we've pretty much one-shotted the entire group, Nami said dryly after they had finished defeating their opponents and were all meeting up to stop the fighting. All they were waiting on were Luffy and Brulee to show up with Crocodile's beaten body. Should we try and stop them? Chopper asked, looking at the two armies approaching each other angrily, despite the white flag being waved. One of the spies in the royal army had shot the leader of the rebellion which had started the fights again. No need, Sencho-kun and Copycat are already here, Robin said, appearing beside them in a flurry of flower petals because she was awesome like that and wanted to watch them jump, which they did. Oi, oi. Luffy's voice seemed dark as it echoed around the area just in time for a figure to crash into the ground and between the two armies before they could meet. Crocodile. More than a few of the army members cried out in shock and disbelief at the sight of the beaten Sandman out cold on the ground. This war is over, Luffy announced as he jumped down to land near Crocodile. Brulee in her crystal disguise jumping down to land right next to his left-hand side. At a motion, his crew all fell in line around them, Zoro and Sanji flanking their captain and his wife on their left and right sides respectively, and the others fanning out behind them. If anyone else still wants to fight. Here Luffy said a mental apology to Shanks for stealing his epic line as Luffy held up a sword he had taken from one of the downed Baroque Works agents just for this reason. Beside him, Brulee brought out her scythe, and behind them the rest of his crew brought out their weapons in a ready stance. Then come. We'll take you all on, Luffy finished as his hat shaded one eye from view, his head tilted just enough to give him a dangerous appearance. A light pressure of his haki to go with the already intimidating appearance had more than a few of the army members backing away scared. And Crocodile's spies had fainted. Straw Hat Demon King Luffy, Tashigi called out as she and several marines tried to push through the crowd, which quickly parted for them. Oh, are you here to fight us for freeing this country, or are you here to do your job and arrest your wayward warlord? Luffy asked with a slight grin on his face as he stared down Tashigi, who gulped a little bit. Dance powder has been found in the possession of the Warlord Crocodile's ships. By the power of the law and justice that I follow, I am arresting Warlord Crocodile to be sentenced to Impel Down immediately, Tashigi said loudly as she slapped a pair of sea stone cuffs onto Crocodile's wrist. Justice my ass, Luffy said with an uncharacteristic sneer. Excuse you, Tashigi asked, taken aback and starting to glare as she turned towards Luffy. How can you preach about justice when you Marines would execute someone just because of who their parents were? Luffy demanded hotly as he recalled how everyone hated Ace because of a man he never met. and feared Luffy himself because of a man he barely knew. What are you talking about? Marines would never do something like that, Tashigi demanded angrily and making Luffy snort. Oh yeah, you're telling me that if the former pirate king Gall D. Roger had a child, then you Marines wouldn't kill that kid even if he was just a baby and had never even met his father? What about Dragon the Revolutionary? If he had a child, would you care to bet that the Marines and government wouldn't kill that child as a baby or kid just because of a man he's never met? Luffy demanded and made Tashigi blink before looking away a bit, and then her eyes hardened. The Marines would never do that, Tashigi said defiantly. What do you want to bet? Luffy asked with a sneer. Tell you what, kid. If the Marines ever try to do something like that, then me and Tashigi here will join you the next time we meet you. Sound like a fair bet? If they don't try before you're brought to justice, then you're coming with us to the fleet, Admiral, Smoker said as he stepped up onto the scene, earning a shocked look from Tashigi. Hina will agree to this as well, Hina said with a smirk, causing Luffy to snort and then nod his head. Agreed, Luffy said, making Robin turn towards the Alabaster royalty who were standing there looking grim at what Luffy had said. King Cobra, as a neutral party, or as neutral as one can be in these circumstances, would you agree to be the official witness for this bet in case there is any contestation of it? Robin asked with a formal bow, earning a startled look and then a nod from the king. Good, now that that's over, I need to go find a snail. I'm supposed to call Mustache Austin today, Luffy said, his grin returning and his dangerous look fading as he threw the sword aside, acting like nothing happened when it pinned a man to the wall by his shirt sleeve. Considering the man had a gun in his hands aimed at the royalty present, well, no one felt much sympathy for him. And I still need to give you your reward for winning your fight, Brulee said behind her echoing mask, making Luffy grin up at her widely. Even though Crocodile is so weak that even I'm able to take him out by now, albeit if only with the element of surprise, Vivi asked with a grin and a twirl of her slashers. We really were bullying his troops by fighting them like we had. We should have probably held back a bit more, Usopp said, only for Zoro to snort. Them, poor Sand Croc there was up against the captain. If that's not bullying, then I don't know what is. A washed-up warlord against the Demon King, Zoro asked, making quite a few of the crew nod their heads in agreement. He didn't put up much of a fight. One punch to the face and I think he'll be eating nothing but soup for a little while. He should be fine though, Luffy said with a roll of his eyes and a shrug. You keep one-shotting people and they might chance your title to One Punch Man Sensho, Robin said with a giggle, earning snickers from the rest of the crew at one of Luffy's titles amongst the fleet, since he could take out most of them with just one punch. Don't even joke. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a beautiful woman to ravish, Luffy said, grinning as he wrapped his arms around Brulee, who let out a slight squeak when he picked her up. Oh no, slow down a second, lover boy. Brulee quickly stopped her husband-to-be from running off with her, causing him to frown a bit. That's a switch. Usually you tell me to go faster, Luffy said, making more than a few people blush, while a few others giggled, and Vivi just slammed her palm into her forehead. You still have to have that talk with Whitebeard. After that's over, then we can have fun. And who knows? If the talk goes well, then maybe I'll make your reward go even further than I promised, Brulee said, tracing one finger down Luffy's cheekbone and towards his chin rather seductively at the end. Luffy's eyes went wide at this. Only a few of the ones even paid attention to who Luffy was going to call, and Smoker looked shocked at the knowledge. The Marines looked either amused or shocked at how much power she had over her husband-to-be as Luffy's head whipped towards Vivi. The princess let out a laugh at Luffy's reaction but led them towards the castle with a grin. Let's go to the palace and get a snail now. I want to talk to Mustache Austin and get my reward. Hello, this is the Moby Dick Yoy. A rather lazy voice answered the snail when the pirates got back to the palace, where Brulee quickly retrieved Ace and Ammon from the ship via mirrors. Marco, it's Ace. I'm calling from Alabasta, and guess who I found while looking for the traitor? Ace asked with a grin, causing the sleepy-looking snail to look a bit more alert now. Oh, did you finally meet up with that beautiful woman of yours and decide to introduce us to her? You could have just brought her back to the ship, you know, Marco asked with a small grin, making Ace look a bit embarrassed as Ammon raised an eyebrow at him, her arms folded underneath her chest in a way that she knew affected him. You've been telling your crewmates about me? Ammon asked, smirking a bit and making Marco laugh slightly. If there's two things he never shuts up about, it's his baby brother, who's apparently more badass than he remembers, and his beautiful girlfriend that he's planning on marrying someday soon. Marco the Phoenix, 1st Division Commander of the Moby Dick. Pleasure to meet you, even if only by snail, Marco said with a laugh and making Ammon's eyes widen a bit. Marrying someday soon? Ammon asked, surprised as she stared at Ace, who blushed and scratched the back of his head sheepishly. As soon as I find a way to get it past your mom without her trying to hurt you afterward, Ace said, pulling a ring box out from his pocket and then quickly catching it when Ammon slammed into him with a makeout session. Well, I'll be damned. He just popped the question, didn't he? Marco asked with a small whistle, causing Luffy to snicker. Well, he pulled out the ring box, but she started making out with him before he could actually ask. That counts as a yes, right? Luffy asked with a grin since he was in charge of the snail now. It did for us. Sister, do I need to throw water on you too? You do remember you have an audience, right? Brulee asked, amused as she looked at her sister, who was still making out heavily as she nearly smothered Ace. Does it look like I care? Ammon shot back as she broke away for air for a moment, giving Ace the chance to slip the ring on her finger. Oh, and don't worry about her mom, Ace. I have a plan, Luffy said with a grin, and in an instant there were 8 people staring at him. Oh shit, 7 of those 8 people said, making Luffy pout while Brulee laughed a bit. Calm down. He already told me the plan and it is actually a good one, Brulee said, reassuring his crew and making them sigh relieved while Ammon raised an eyebrow at this. Luffy had a good idea. Who hit my baby brother on the head? Ace demanded, looking panicked at this and earning a snort from Marco. Ace, does your wife know about your brother complex, Yoi? Marco called through the snail. Shut up, Marco. Anyways, my crybaby brother here wants to talk to Pops. Mind putting him on? Ace asked, glaring at the snail before changing the subject when Brulee glared at him for manhandling her fiancé. I'm right here, Ace. I hear I'll have a new daughter-in-law soon, Whitebeard asked as the snail switched hands, making Ace beam and turn towards his wife-to-be. And a grandchild, Ace said with a grin, causing the snail to freeze for almost a full minute. What? Whitebeard asked, the snail's eyes wide and its mouth beginning to grin even wider. I believe Ace was saying that since you're his pops ... then our baby will be your grandchild. You won't get to meet the baby until he comes out in several months, however, Ammon said, smiling slightly as Ace moved to pepper her stomach with kisses again, causing her to roll her eyes but smile softly as she ran her fingers through his hair. Marco, get the booze and tell the nurses to forget about my health for one night. I'm going to be a granddad, Whitebeard boomed loudly to his ship, causing a few startled exclamations to be heard as the others on the Moby Dick began to question what he was talking about. So what does your brother want? Whitebeard asked as Marco began filling in the rest of the crew on the news in the background. Oh, I just wanted to thank you for giving Ace a dad at first, but then I heard about the Nakama killer and wanted to know what we should do if me and my crew runs into him. If he's hiding from you until he can get his own crew together, then Paradise would be a good place to lie low, Luffy pointed out, earning a hum from the old captain as his sons and daughters let out cheers in the background about having a niece or nephew to spoil soon. It's my pleasure to have him as a son. Would you like to become one of my sons? Your crew can join as well, of course, Whitebeard offered, focusing on that part first. Now the king of pirates can't have a captain, Luffy said, causing there to be dead silence on the other end of the line for a moment before Whitebeard laughed. Gururarara, what a cheeky brat. If not joining us, then what about an alliance? Whitebeard asked, and the snail looked like it was going to break because of the wide grin on its face. Sure, that's like being friends, and I love making friends, Luffy said with a bright grin of his own, causing Ace to snort while Ammon stared at Luffy in disbelief. Gururarara, well put, brat. You're in Alabaster, right? Whitebeard double-checked that information. Yeah, we just got done beating up the sand croc guy that was hurting Vivi's home, Luffy confirmed with a nod. The closest would be the Ice Witch. Whitey had gone to the North Blue for something recently and should be making her way back through Paradise soon. I can send her to exchange the Sake Cup in my place and have you sign the alliance agreement. All allied captains keep a copy on their ships for situations like this. Marco, go call our favorite witch, Whitebeard said, making Luffy look at his fiancée with a curious tilt of his head. Whitey, Ice Witch Bay, captain of the icebreaker ship Snowfall. Her abilities all revolve around ice and snow, but it is unknown if she had eaten a devil fruit, and which one if she did. The Ice Loja belongs to Admiral Aokiji, and the Snow fruit is taken as well from my information. It could be a Zoan surrounding the element. However, given that she was awarded the witch, part of her title implies that it is something else. Brulee began immediately, having been the main spy in her family, and Whitebeard had been one of her mother's rivals. Oh, how do you think that? Whitebeard asked, sounding amused more than anything by the information on one of his allies. Nami, our navigator, is called the Weather Witch. Her ability, however, is merely science and her own innate ability for knowing weather patterns. It's not a devil fruit and it's not magic, but it seems like it to others. My best guess is that it's something like that, or perhaps Whitey's Haki element is ice, and when she uses her armament Haki, she is surrounded by cold air and ice. Of course, there's also the possibility that it is a devil fruit that we don't know of. There's a heat fruit, so why not a cold fruit as well? Brulee asked, earning a nod from Ammon. That did make a lot of sense. Gururara, what a smart one you are. Which of your crewmates is this Straw Hat Demon King? Whitebeard asked, sounding impressed despite himself. You can just call me Luffy, or just plain Straw Hat. She's my fiancée, Luffy said with a grin at how much his future wife impressed the Yonko. Ah, how lucky you are to find love so strong so young. Tell us when and where the wedding is and we'll come visit, or at least send a gift, Whitebeard said with a laugh. It'll be sometime after I take care of the situation with her mom. I'll tell you when, Luffy promised, causing Whitebeard to blink a bit. 2 women with moms that would cause trouble with their daughters' husbands? That's a bit of a stretch, Whitebeard said, raising an eyebrow on the snail. 2 women with the same mom who'd cause trouble. My little brother is dating my fiance's little sister. Believe it or not, but we didn't even know about it until I met up with Luffy, Ace said with a grin. It sure was a surprise to learn that my little sister is going to marry my boyfriend's little brother, especially given how much older and taller than them we are, Ammon said with a smirk as she reached for a cigarette by habit, only to remember that they had been stolen and hidden and she had sworn off cigarettes. Who cares about the age difference? We're pirates. Besides, I think you're beautiful, Ace said to his wife with a grin as he pressed a kiss to her neck, causing her to laugh a bit and push him away. All right, tone it down a bit, Romeo. I'm already pregnant and I'd rather not risk having twins on the first go, thank you, Ammon said, making Ace grin goofily at her as he placed a hand over her belly. I don't know, sis. After all, twins and triplets and more run in the family. Brulee teased her sister, who reached over and shoved her a bit playfully in the shoulder, nearly knocking Brulee over with her monstrous strength. Shouldn't you be worried about that more than I am? After all, you two are going to be trying for kids yourself soon enough, Ammon said with a smirk, causing Brulee to blush. Whenever you're ready, love, Luffy promised his fiancée, who blushed brighter and glares at him. You're not helping, moron. Why do I love you anyways? Brulee asked, scowling and trying to look angry, only to look more embarrassed than anything and making the crew laugh at her embarrassment. There was quite a bit of laughter over the snail from the WB pirates, who heard Luffy's immediate answer while Ammon snorted and his crew were nearly on the floor laughing. Because I'm made of rubber. So where are the girls' baths? Sanji asked as they were all relaxing in the spa bathhouse with King Cobra and Mr. 8. Like I would tell you, the head guard said, glaring darkly at the pirate. Over that wall, King Cobra said, pointing at the correct wall with a grin on his face. Your Majesty, Higaram said, scandalized, while Sanji grinned and moved towards the wall. Sanji, Luffy growled slightly, causing the chef to pause and glance back at his captain. He paled drastically when he saw his captain with his hat covering his eyes and a slightly dangerous aura around him. You're not about to peek at my fiancé, are you? Luffy asked, tilting his head so that one eye was shown and making Sanji gulp loudly. Or mine, Ace growled as well, making Sanji pale even further and slide away from the wall. No, Sanji said, making Ace and Luffy give a smile at him now. You boys all right in there? Nami asked, her head popping up over the wall as she grinned at the boys. We're fine. Why? Igaram asked, looking confused at the sudden question. Because I expected the boys to try peeking by now, Nami said bluntly and making Zoro snort slightly. You think any of us will try to peek when the captain's girl and her sister are over there? While Captain and Ace are in here with us? Zoro asked, quirking an eyebrow at the orangette and earning a loud snort from her. Nice. Hear that, you two? Anti-pervert guard dogs for the both of you, Nami called to the other women, causing a distinctive wee-wee laugh to crack through the area. That's what puts Luffy above most other men. He's not a pervert, Brulee called back, causing Sanji to sink into his depressed mode like usual as Nami laughed and dropped back down the wall. Hello, I'm looking for Ace and Straw Hat Demon King, a woman said, entering the bath on the men's side with nothing but a small towel on. Damn it, Whitey, what the hell? Ace yelped at his sister, who didn't even bat an eye as she slid into the water right alongside the men. Hey there, brother, Whitey said with a grin towards Ace, while the men were making sure they were covered and either slinking away from her or looking ecstatic in Sanji's case. So this is your cute little brother with the record-breaking first bounty? Whitey asked, glancing at Luffy with a grin on her face that turned teasing. He's cuter than his bounty poster, and I love what the scar does for making him look dangerous. Nice to meet you, cutie. I'm Whitey Ice Witch Bay. I believe you were expecting me, Whitey asked teasingly as she leaned closer to Luffy in order to trace his jaw and then drop her hand to his scarred chest. Nice to meet you too, but you should remove her hand, Luffy said, not even batting an eye or blushing slightly at her actions and making her pout a bit before her haki alerted her to something that had her withdrawing her hand quickly, just in time for a scythe to pass through the air right where her hand had been and just barely missing Luffy's legs. You'd better have a damn good reason for putting your hands on my man, Brulee growled darkly as she held her scythe and was wearing nothing but her towel, glaring at the purplish-haired woman. Though so you're the face behind the crystal copycat. Pleasure to meet you. I'm Whitey Bay, Whitey said, not even bothered by the near dismemberment as she smiled at the much taller woman for a second before turning towards Ace. Whitey, I know you love making sure things are sincere between couples, especially those including your siblings, but for your sake don't, Ace said, pinching the bridge of his nose as his sister gave him a sultry smile that quickly morphed into a pout. A yelp from Nami had the men looking over at the wall separating the men's bath from the women's just in time for it to slide apart, separated in half. The reason why. A rather dangerous-looking Ammon holding her Mato and glaring darkly at Whitey, who suddenly stiffened. Ace, what's a big mom pirate doing here? Whitey asked as the water around her in the spa began to cool and even freeze a bit. Two of them, actually. 8th daughter Brulee, and that's my older sister, 3rd daughter Ammon. Brulee said, holding her scythe at the ready as Whitey slowly rose from the water with some water following her and freezing into two sharp blades. Brulee's eyes narrowed. That was no hacky manipulation she had ever seen or heard of before, and that wasn't anything like her brother's heat fruit, so the cold fruit was out. Whitey, no, Ace said, standing up immediately in between his sister and his soon-to-be wife. Ace, explain. Whitey's voice was colder and clipped now as she gripped the blades. Her back turned to King Cobra and the others as she had Ammon on her left side and Brulee on her left. Whitey, sis, this is my fiancée Ammon Charlotte. Alma, this is my sister Whitey Bay. Ace said calmly as he stood in front of Ammon almost protectively, despite the fact that she was nearly 4 feet taller than him. This is my soon-to-be wife Brulee Charlotte. Touch her and I'll have to fight off Whitebeard for kicking your ass. Luffy growled as he stood in front of Brulee protectively as well, so that Whitey was now staring down the two brothers. Cocky rookie, aren't you? Whitey asked with a humorless smile as she tightened her grip on her blades before relaxing it slightly. Try me, Luffy growled, exerting a little of his haki to make her breathing difficult and let her feel that he was restraining a lot of his power. Luffy, easy on that haki. It's not good for unborn babies. Ace snapped at his brother, who quickly reined it in and shot a worried look at Ammon. It's all right. I have let out a bit of my own haki to shield the baby as soon as he began raising his. Ammon assured Ace and Luffy, both who looked relieved at this. Baby? Whitey asked, looking shocked at that as her blue eyes locked onto Ace and Ammon. Put the weapons down, Whitey. You don't threaten pregnant women, I know you don't. Besides, like I said, Ammon is going to be my wife as soon as we take care of the situation with her mom. Brulee is going to marry my brother, and he has an innate ability to tell who is good and who is lying, Ace said calmly to his sister, even as he stepped back as if to guard Ammon, one of his hands reaching back to cover her stomach and quickly being held there by one of her own hands as they both subconsciously moved to protect the baby in her belly. I'm going to put my weapons down when they put theirs down. I don't threaten those expecting a baby, but I don't let them threaten me either, Whitey said, her voice not leaving any tone for argument. Everyone just calm down and we can talk about this rationally, and preferably with our clothes on, Vivi said, trying to calm everything down and get them out of the baths. Whitey, look at me, Ace said, looking his sister straight in the eyes and causing her to do the same. You know that I wouldn't let you be attacked. You're one of my sisters. I won't let you attack Ammon though, or Brulee. Trust me. You trust me, don't you? Ace asked, making Whitey relax a bit. Yeah, I trust you, little bro, Whitey said, sighing as she let the ice swords turn back into water and fall back into the bath. Then let's all get out of the bath, get dressed, and then you can have the whole captain meet captain thing with Luffy. I promise that unless you start things, then my wife and Luffy's wife aren't going to hurt you. Right, ladies? Ace asked, looking at Brulee and then at Ammon. As long as she doesn't go after my sister or my baby. Ammon agreed as she put her sword back into its sheath, although she still had one hand on her belly over Ace's. Given her age, the chances of her having a baby had been slim, especially since her mama had never married her off. She didn't want to risk anything happening to this little miracle inside of her. If she keeps her hands off of my husband, we won't have a problem, Brulee said, glaring slightly before putting her scythe back into a mirror that she summoned with one hand without thinking about it. Oh, if it makes you feel better, I just did that to make sure he was loyal to his soon-to-be wife. I do it to all couples to make sure that there's no hurt later if someone cheats on their girl or boyfriend, Whitey said, waving that off as if it were nothing big and making a sigh and nod. I can vouch for her on that. I've seen her do it to 2 other couples. She tried it with me when I first started talking about my girlfriend, but I smacked her upside the head and she pouted and whined for an hour, Ace said, making Ammon look less than pleased. Mine, Ammon said, pulling Ace towards her and leaning down to place a possessive bite on Ace's shoulder junction. Yep, yours. Ace just grinned and kissed her cheek, making her look pleased as she pulled her fangs out of his shoulder. Kinky, Whitey quipped with a smirk on her face, making Ammon blush a bit and avert her eyes. You think that's kinky? You should see what Brulee does. She really likes the fact that I'm made of rubber, Luffy said with a laugh and making Brulee go bright red. I don't doubt it, Whitey said, eyeing the boy in a new light while Brulee couldn't decide on being embarrassed or pissed. She settled on both. Don't tell them that, idiot. Now then, it's a pleasure to meet a new brother, Whitey said, sitting across from Luffy with a smirk on her face and her clothes back on, thankfully causing the 2 possessive women to calm down a bit. It's great to meet you too, Luffy said, grinning back at Whitey as they sat at a small table on the Mary's deck, Whitey's icebreaker ship not too far from them. Long as she remembers what I said, Brulee muttered darkly from where Luffy's crew were relaxing behind him in various places on the ship, along with Vivi, who was still considered part of their crew much to Whitey's surprise. Whitey acts like a sister to those who join the family, Ace said in defense of his purple-haired sister as he hung out with Ammon on one of the lawn chairs that the snake neck seems to have commandeered. Messes with and teases her siblings but makes sure nothing will hurt them, and those that do don't live very long, Ammon asked, earning a hum of agreement from her boyfriend, who was cuddling her and occasionally stroking her stomach. Each time he did brought a small smile to Ammon's face. He was looking forward to this baby just as much as she was. Then we'll get along just fine, Ammon said with a smirk that Whitey looked over at her and returned. So shall we exchange the cups in the Captain's Alliance Accord? Whitey asked, looking back at Luffy, who raised an eyebrow. Only after Brulee and Robin look over the accord. I trust you guys, but better safe than sorry, Whitey and Ace both said in tandem with a grin on their faces as Robin and Brulee walked over. So you thought of a way to get the two of them away from their mother? Whitey asked, kicking back and relaxing as she waited for the two to get done looking over the accord. I got that covered, Luffy said with a grin that was both savage and mischievous, earning a curious look from Whitey. Will you need backup? Whitey asked, earning a curious look from Luffy. Why do you care? Ammon was the one to ask, confused as she looked at Whitey. You're going to marry my brother, and you make him happy, so that makes you my sister. Luffy there is about to join the family and he's going to marry the purple-haired one. That makes him my new brother and her my sister. If you need help, then I'll help. It's what siblings do, Whitey said with a shrug and a smile on her face, causing Ammon to quirk an eyebrow before she smiled a bit and nodded in acceptance of this answer. Nah, I've got a plan, Luffy said with a wide grin on his face that made his crew and brother pale. I've already heard and approved of it. Brulee quickly spoke up, making the crew relax. What's that about? Whitey asked, looking amused more than anything as she looked at Luffy, who was pouting at his crew. Luffy's a wonderful captain, don't get us wrong, but his plans. Nami trailed off, trying to think of a gentle way to put it around overprotective Big Brother number 1 and Brulee. They're like if your plans mixed with oven and Diafukus with some of Flam's thrown in for flavor, Brulee said dryly to her sister, who blanched at that. She was always a cut-first type of person, but to mix her plans in with her two older brothers and then the head of the Special Forces. Any of your plans revolving around my baby needs to either be submitted to me or Brulee for review and approval, or else I will cut off Brulee's favorite toy, Ammon said, looking at Luffy, who looked confused at that and turned to Brulee with his mouth open. She quickly placed a hand over his mouth. She doesn't mean the plastic and leather ones. She means the part of your body necessary for baby making, Brulee explained, making Luffy pale and cover himself while Whitey laughed. Everything is clear and good, Sencho-kun. Robin finally deemed the article worthy as she placed it back down onto the small table with a smile and giggle. Okay, thanks Robin, Luffy said with a bright grin after Brulee removed her hand, causing Robin to smile fondly and ruffle his hair. Anytime, Robin said before going back to her own lawn chair and book while Sanji brought out fresh drinks for everyone. Thank you, Whitey said with a smile as she was handed her drink, which quickly chilled in her hand, much to Brulee's curiosity, since that was no type of devil fruit ability she heard of. Anytime for such a beautiful woman, Sanji said, flirting again before quickly hurrying off and giving the other women their shakes. Saving Ammon's for last. Here you are, one smoothie made from whole fruits and full of nutrients needed for pregnant women to make sure the baby is healthy and strong, Sanji said, smiling softly as he handed Ammon her smoothie and causing her to look surprised but take the smoothie. Thank you. There are nutrients needed for the baby to be healthy, Ammon asked as she looked at the smoothie, one hand dropping to rest over Ace's on her belly. She could make the baby healthier. A list of them formulated by the best doctors in the world. I can give you a copy so that you know what's good for the baby and what isn't when you have to leave, Sanji said, smiling but not flirting with the pregnant woman. She was taken and even expecting. He was a flirt, sure, but he'd never hit on a woman in a happy and committed relationship. Thank you, Ammon said, smiling slightly as she began to sip at the smoothie while Sanji just nodded before handing out the drinks to the men, starting with Ace since he was already there and a guest on the ship. Time to share the cup. You'll have to share the sake with Pops and the rest of the captains in the Alliance when you meet up with them, but this will seal the deal and make you my brother officially, Whitey said, smiling as she poured the sake Sanji had set on the table into the cups, setting aside her drink for the moment. Just like when Ace and I were little, Luffy said, picking up his cup with a laugh as he clinked it against hers. They both tossed it back, and while Whitey took it down like a pro, Luffy pulled a face after he was done. That's just as bad as the sake we stole from Danton, Luffy said, pouting and making Ace laugh slightly. It took her forever to figure out where it went. She acted super pissed about it too, Ace said with a laugh while Luffy laughed as well. Yeah, but when she thought we were sleeping she started crying and saying how we were growing into proper mountain bandits, Luffy said, earning a nod from Ace while the crew looked at them both at this. Raised by mountain bandits. That explains a lot, Nami muttered to Usopp, who snorted his agreement. Gramps was super pissed when he learned we were drinking sake by the time you were 7, Ace said, making Luffy whine and rub his head. His fist of love left me seeing spots for hours. Stupid Gigi using haki, Luffy whined, making Ace wince in sympathy while Whitey's smile froze on her face, and her drink froze in her glass. Oh, someone dared hurt both of my little brothers using haki when they were children, Whitey hissed out the last part, causing the two boys to look at her confused. In Luffy's case, well, of course he had to use haki on me. I'm made of rubber. Hits don't hurt me otherwise, Luffy said as if it were obvious and making Ace wince since that only made Whitey's cold aura extend even further. Who is this grandfather of yours? I need to have a little talk with him, Whitey said, and her very voice was chilly, sending shivers down the coward trio's spines. You can't do that. Gigi is in the Marines and you're a pirate. He'd arrest you. I don't want to have to break into Impel Down again. Luffy whined, causing Ace to take a deep, steadying breath. Break into Impel Down? Whitey asked, looking surprised since that would have made headline news for sure. Hey, oh yeah, I haven't done that yet this time, Luffy said, realizing he said something that he hadn't done yet and making Whitey's eyes narrow at him. I'm going to need you to explain. Go ahead, Lou. It'll be fine. Ace quickly reassured his brother to tell his sister about the time travel. Whitey was one of the ones who was more likely to believe them after all, and she's great backup. Okay, we were almost to Raftel when we went into this stupid mist thing just off the shore, and next thing we know we're back in time a few minutes after we docked. It really sucked too cause we had just made it, Luffy said, whining about that. He still couldn't get over how they had just made it to the finish line only for them to be right back at the starting point. Time travel? Whitey asked, raising both eyebrows at the straw-hatted captain. We can prove it if you want, Zoro grunted as he moved to be over near his captain. No need for that. I believe you. It's just the first time I've heard of it happening to someone I know, Whitey said, waving him down and going back to stirring her drink a bit. Wait, what? Nami asked, looking over at the purple-haired captain who merely quirked an eyebrow at them. My powers don't come from hacky manipulation, although ice is my element, nor does it come from a fruit. You could say you aren't the first one to have something weird happen to them thanks to mists around islands. Besides, I can tell just looking at you guys that you aren't lying, Whitey said as she lifted one hand and formed a pointed star like a throwing star from Wano in her hand made entirely of ice. Ace just looked at his sister completely deadpan. I can't tell if you're just trolling us now or not. You know, when you told us you had a plan, I didn't know that meant you would storm Whole Cake Island, beat up her two oldest sons and then just grin at her, Whitey said dryly as she looked at Luffy, who just laughed. Whitey had been curious enough to come along when Luffy announced he was going to put his big mom plan into action. Ace had gone along in case his brother needed backup. And like hell was Ammon going to let her fiancé and little sister deal with their mother on their own? She was left staring in shock as Luffy proceeded to thoroughly school her two favorite big brothers on the difference in power between commanders of an emperor, or in this case empress, and the man who was literally from the future and technically the pirate king. He did reach Raftel after all, even if he had been sent back in time just after touching the shores. Wait for it, Brulee said, and in less than a minute Big Mom showed up and she looked furious. You show up out of nowhere and beat my two strongest sons without breaking a sweat. Who are you? Why are you here? Big Mom demanded, glaring at Luffy, who was unbothered. I'm your newest son-in-law. Nice to meet you, Luffy said, grinning up at her, and she actually paused for a moment. You could actually see her thinking about that as she gazed at her daughters, who looked just as surprised. Brulee just looked completely done with her fiancé's antics. There have been no recent weddings amongst my girls, Big Mom snarled after a moment, making Luffy shrug slightly. Well, not yet. My wife and I are waiting until our whole crew is together before the official wedding. I'm here cause of that and for my older brother and sister actually, Luffy said, admitting that much and not doing anything as Ammon and Brulee moved Prospero and Katakuri over to the rest of their siblings who had gathered at the fighting. What? Big Mom was as confused as most of her children, while Whitey was just watching everything in amusement, while Ace was tense and staring on high alert until Ammon was back over near him. Yeah, see, my soon-to-be wife loves her mother, but you wouldn't let us marry without me proving myself. So I came here as a wedding present for her and to make things easier on my older brother and his soon-to-be wife, who is another of your daughters, Luffy said with a grin, not even bothered when Big Mom tried to squish him. Oi, let me finish talking first, Luffy said, pouting but unharmed thanks to his rubber power, especially since she hadn't used haki. What? Big Mom stared shocked and in disbelief, much like most of her kids. Look, if I fight you to a draw or I win, then you accept and approve of the marriage is okay. Luffy summed everything up quickly. Ha, if you win against me, then not only will I accept the marriages, but me and my crew will join you. All of Tottleland and everyone and thing on it and under my banner will be your faithful and unflinchingly loyal crew, Big Mom said with a laugh at the seeming rookie. I don't really want your crew or your islands, but if those are the terms. Luffy's grin turned savage. Fine with me, but I'm no fool at this kind of thing. Swear it. Swear it on your flag, your ships, and your own soul, Luffy demanded, making the crew around him gasp. Swearing on a flag and ship were big enough, but as the children of the person who ate the soul fruit, they knew that swearing on a person's own soul was so much more encompassing and dangerous. Big Mom didn't seem to mind though, as she laughed and swore it in front of dozens of her children and other crew members. Set your terms, Luffy said, allowing her that right and knowing from Brulee what she was likely to set it as. If you can knock me off of my feet before I can kill you, then you win, Big Mom said with a laugh, overly confident in her iron body. Brulee sighed at how easily she had been able to predict her mother's actions. Her mother could be really predictable, and that was not a good thing to be in the new world. It was especially bad for one of the Yonko. You asked for it, Luffy said with a small grin. Make this official. Compose start the battle, Big Mom said, making her eldest daughter move from where she was patching up her brother's bruises and few broken bones. It seems like Luffy went easy on them. In fact, Brulee and Ammon knew that he did. Brulee had promised him a very special reward if he managed to defeat her brothers without hurting them too badly. Anything less than dismemberment and permanent maiming was fine. And Luffy was good at beating people without outright maiming them. Big Mom let out a shout as she moved as if to steal his lifespan. She was shocked when it never showed up, and instead he just bit his thumb. Gum gum elephant gun. Thanks to the surprise of it, Zeus needed to go and catch Big Mom to keep her from hitting the sea. Whitey was laughing herself hoarse at the looks on their faces, or because of Brulee's surprised yet snarky remark. Well, that was his fastest fight yet. That was so fast it was disappointing. And Luffy never disappoints. He won fair and square. Prospero was reassuring his brothers and sisters as their mother was brought back, and she looked annoyed but resigned. She did swear on her soul after all. Fine. Which two of my daughters are getting married? Big Mom asked, growling slightly as she glared at Luffy, who grinned happily up at her. I'm marrying his older brother, Ammon said finally as she stepped forward towards her mother, causing all of her siblings to stare at her in disbelief. Ammon? Big Mom asked, just as shocked as her other children, while Ammon gave a small smile as Ace stayed close protectively. A Whitebeard commander, Oven asked, tense and alert at the sight of Ace, especially when he was so near to one of his favorite sisters. My future husband, Ammon corrected as she held Ace's hand, smiling down at him while he grinned back up at her brightly. Of course he is, Big Mom said, her eyebrow twitching slightly. If it makes you feel better, then you can start planning the baby shower, Mama, Ammon said, trying to placate her mother a little bit and causing most of the siblings to pause and then stare at her wide-eyed while she put a hand on her belly. Say again, Big Mom asked, blinking at her daughter, who smiled and glanced down at her belly. My soon-to-be husband here got me pregnant. You've got a new grandchild on the way, Mama, Ammon said with a bright smile and causing Big Mom to blink slowly for a moment before looking happy. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? Why have all of this happened? Big Mom asked, smiling brightly at her daughter, who gave her a deadpan look. You do realize that my fiancé here is a Whitebeard commander, right? There's no way you would have approved, Ammon said, causing Big Mom to pause for a second before nodding. True, Big Mom agreed. How did you meet a Whitebeard pirate anyways? Compote questioned her younger sister, who looked a bit sheepish and embarrassed. Mama sent me on a mission to a rain island a little over 2 years ago. I ducked into a bar to get out of the constant rain and didn't realize he was a Whitebeard pirate when I sat at the bar next to him to wait out the rain. He was talking about his little brother being the cutest thing in forever, and I shot back about how my baby siblings were cuter. We spent about 3 hours talking about how adorable our baby siblings are, Ammon said with a shrug as she grinned at Ace, who snickered. I still say Luffy is cuter than most of your siblings, Ace said with a grin and earning a snort from Ammon. My baby siblings are cuter and I have more of them to tell stories about, Ammon shot back with a grin. And which of my children caught the eye of such a powerful and crafty pirate like you? Big Mom asked, breaking up the soon-to-be debate between Ammon and Ace about whose baby sibling was cuter. Luffy grinned widely up at her. Hold on a sec. I need to stretch closer to her size, Luffy said with a wide grin as he stretched his legs out a bit. At that, most of the siblings looked at Smoothie, who was staring at her long-legged sisters curiously. Okay, I'm about your size now, Twig, Luffy said, grinning and earning a scowl from his future wife. My name is Brulee, damn it, Brulee said, scowling and smacking Luffy upside the back of his head and causing his legs to snap back to their normal size, making him bounce a bit like a rubber ball. How did you even meet her? Brulee rarely ever leaves the islands, Prospero asked, looking at his witch-like sister, who looked at Luffy. Shishishishi. There's a reason why I'm a supposed rookie and yet I'm able to take out you guys, Luffy said, grinning widely and making Whitey look more amused than anything else as she enjoyed the show. Oh, she could not wait to tell Pops about this. New World Mists? Big Mom asked flatly, earning a solemn nod from Brulee. Probably worse than normal New World Mists. We were on Raftel, Brulee informed her mother, who paused and stared wide-eyed at her daughter and her future son-in-law. You're the new Pirate King? Big Mom asked as her entire crew stared shocked at the unassuming young man with the large X-mark burn on his chest. Was going to be. Stupid Raftel sent us back in time literally like 2 or 3 minutes after we hit the shore, Luffy said, whining slightly at that and making Brulee sigh slightly. Luffy, stop whining about that and I'll let you have a double reward later, Brulee said, making Luffy grin and look like an innocent young man. I'll be good, Luffy said with a grin and making Brulee snort slightly. You couldn't say that with a straight face if you tried, Brulee said with a fond smile as she looked at her future husband, who just laughed. He's a pirate, the king of pirates at that. What do you expect? Whitey asked with a grin on her face and drawing the Charlotte's attention to her now. What's the Ice Witch doing here? Is she your second wife, Pirate King? Katakuri asked, glaring darkly at Luffy. Although that might be because Luffy was going to marry his favorite baby sister and he wasn't able to kick the boy's ass. Hell no, Brulee said darkly while Whitey laughed loudly at that. Oh, but I guarantee you I could make both of you very happy. Whitey teased, making Brulee blush brightly and splutter while Ammon snorted. I'm not. Brulee couldn't finish the sentence as she blubbered with a bright red face. Things just got weird for our family, didn't they? Prospero asked, sighing and looking at his eldest sister, who just shrugged her shoulders slightly. Honestly, compared to the usual things, this is pretty much like your average Tuesday. Although to be fair, it is Monday, Compote said with another shrug as she watched Brulee try to strangle Whitey, who just laughed and evaded her expertly. That explains it, Prospero said before he said one thing that every person who's ever gone to school and work agreed with. Mondays always make everything worse. They suck. So Ammon's pregnant. What about you, Brulee? Should I be expecting grandkids from you too? Big Mom asked at the banquet, where she had explained what had happened to the family members who weren't there for the bet. Pregnant, Citron's 6-year-old daughter, Peaches, asked curiously, looking up at her mama. That means she's going to have a baby, Citron explained, while little 4-year-old Inanna wandered over to her sister. Baby? Inanna asked, causing Ammon to smile and pick her up, settling her baby sister on her lap. That's right, sweetheart. Right now I have a baby right in here, Ammon said, smiling and putting Inanna's hand on her belly and making Inanna look confused. You ate a baby. Peaches was wide-eyed and pale while some of the siblings snickered and Ammon merely sighed. No, I didn't eat the baby. Do you remember when your Uncle Moscato's wife had a baby a few months ago? Ammon asked, making Inanna frown slightly. Her belly got really big and then she was skinny again and had a baby in her arms, Peaches said, making Moscato and his wife Gala laugh a bit from where they were seating not far away. That's right. Her belly was really big because the baby was inside of her belly and was close to coming out. My baby isn't ready to come out yet. My baby is still growing. Ammon did her best to explain it to the younger members of the family who were migrating towards her curiously. Like Auntie Cinnamon's belly getting big? 10-year-old Pippin asked, pointing at Cinnamon, who was sitting down not far away, with her husband hovering over her worriedly, largely due to the 8-month swell of her pregnant stomach. That's right, Cinnamon's going to have a baby too, and that's why her belly's been getting big. My belly is still small cause the baby's not big yet. Her baby will be here soon, but mine won't be here for almost a year, Ammon said, while Inanna frowned slightly with her hand still on her sister's stomach. No kick? Inanna asked, tilting her head confused and making Ammon smile softly and run her fingers through her sister's short pink hair. No, the baby's not kicking yet. My baby won't be kicking for a little longer, sweetheart. You can go feel Cinnamon's baby's kick though, and your Auntie Blanche's babies, Ammon said, looking over at Cracker's wife, who was almost due as well. But how'd the baby get in your belly? Peaches asked, confused and making most of the ones over the age of 16 blanch or look horrified at the question. Ammon didn't even bat an eye. It's easy. I met someone I love who loves me too, Ammon said, smiling at Ace, who was sitting next to her and smiling back as she leaned into him slightly. Then what? Pippin asked, making Ammon wink at her and hold a finger up to her lips as if she were sharing a secret. Then he kisses me. He has to kiss my lips and then he kisses my stomach, and if he does it just right, then that's how the baby is put in the mommy's stomach. Sometimes it doesn't work though, so the mommy and daddy have to try again and again until it works, Ammon said, without showing any indication that she was lying through her teeth to the little ones. Really? Inanna asked, frowning as she turned her gaze to her other sisters and sister-in-laws and a few of her nieces. Of course, Katakuri's wife Absinthe said with a smile. So are you going to have a baby too, Auntie Brulee? Pippin asked, smiling as she looked at Brulee, who blushed brightly but shook her head. No, there won't be any babies in my belly for a while, Brulee said with a smile as little Ale, her youngest brother, looked up at her curiously. Why not? Doesn't he kiss you? Ale asked, making Brulee smile and pick up the 5-year-old, cuddling him on her lap. Of course I do. Every time I beat someone up I get to kiss her, Luffy said with a grin. But there's going to be a lot of dangerous situations we'll be in soon, and I don't want to risk putting the baby in so much danger. That's why we won't be trying to have a baby for a while, Brulee said, causing Big Mom to raise an eyebrow at the small pirate king. And that's all right with you? Big Mom asked Luffy, who grinned brightly at her. Yeah, her body. She'd do all the hard work, so it's her choice, Luffy said, nodding his head in agreement. Well, isn't he considerate? Where can I get one like him? Smoothie asked, teasing her big sister, who scowled and moved to recline against Luffy possessively. Well, he's taken, Brulee said with a glare towards her sister, who gave a fake pout. Try it and you'll see why I was considered sweet commander level before you even knew what a sword was for, Ammon hissed without even glancing at her sister, who had looked her way. Oh, didn't you two ever learn how to share? Smoothie asked, pouting at the 2 older sisters, who gave her matching unimpressed looks. I have another older brother if you want to meet him. He has amnesia at the moment though, Luffy piped up, making Ace look at him before snorting slightly. I forgot that you said Sabo was saved from the wreck by your dad, Ace said, making Luffy nod his head. Yeah, but he has a burn scar on his face. I like scars. They prove you were strong enough to survive, but other people act weird about them, Luffy said, looking at Smoothie, who perked up. A scar? Like your very sexy chest one? Smoothie asked, eyeing Luffy's burn scar and making Brulee scowl as she moved to sit on her lap, him stretching out his legs to make her more comfortable. Mine, Brulee snarled at her younger but taller sister. And I have dibs on seconds if I can ever talk her into it, Whitey said with a smirk, causing Brulee to glare darkly at her. She's teasing you, Brulee. Stop reacting and she'll give it up, Ace said quickly before his future sister-in-law could kill his sister. What's sexy mean? Anana asked, looking up at Em, and who shot Smoothie a glare while the white-haired woman looked sheepish at all the curious little ones looking at her or whoever was closest. Smoothie began to ask the snake neck for help, only to be shot a glare and a flash of her sister's fangs. Smoothie wasn't dumb enough to argue with the swordswoman's decree, which seemed to be agreed upon by the others in the room. You're on your own, Smoothie. Well, it was nice meeting you all, especially considering how I met everyone last time. I gotta go back to the Mary though. Need to make sure the island's under our protection, Luffy said with a grin as he stood up after a few minutes of watching Smoothie try to stutter out a way for the kids to ask their parents when they're older. The island? You're planning to put all of Alabasta under your protection? Hammond asked, looking at Luffy, who nodded his head. Yep, Vivi's one of us, even if she can't sail with us, and Alabasta's her home. Of course we'd protect it, Luffy said with a bright smile on his face as Brulee stood up beside him. From the smirk on her face, she could tell the thoughts of disbelief and slight awe her siblings had at Luffy's care for those he deemed. I'm a bit jealous of her luck, Smoothie said, sighing and pouting still over that, although those closest to her could tell that she was mostly joking by the look in her eyes. I got dibs, Whitey said with a grin on her face and making Brulee's eyebrow twitch as she began to flex the sharp claw-like nails on her fingers. I'm going to. Brulee was cut off when Luffy lengthened his legs and pulled her into a toe-curling kiss that had several of her sisters catcalling, while her brothers looked less than pleased. Don't be upset or worried. You're the only one for me, Luffy said after pulling away and resting his forehead against her head. Idiot, Brulee said, smiling slightly and blushing brightly when she recalled that her siblings and mother were around and watching them. You're idiot. Now come on. We'd better get back to the others before they try storming Toddlin, Luffy said with a grin and making the other siblings look at him surprised. You act like they would, Big Mom said, staring at Luffy, who just laughed, and even Brulee looked amused. Last time when I met you all, the Germa had stolen my cook to marry him off to one of your daughters. Half of our crew had gone ahead onto Wano. Me and the other half came to get Sanji back. We got him, and all of us except for one who blew himself up as a last-ditched attempt to take one of you down, out of here alive and in one piece. Honestly, he didn't need to do that. I think he just wanted to try and take someone down as revenge for the last time he was here, Luffy said, pulling a face. He hadn't seen the need for Pedro to blow himself up. They could have just launched the bombs as a distraction to get rid of the candy. Who died? Ammon asked, looking worried for her siblings as she held Anana closer. They had told her none of theirs had died and that none of her siblings had died because of them. Pedro blew himself up and tried to take the Candy Guy with him, but Candy Man didn't die from it. He lost an arm, but he wasn't dead, Luffy said, pointing over at Prospero, who looked surprised and gulped slightly. Gave all of us a scare though, with the flames and smoke covering you from view. I swear Ammon nearly jumped from her ship to try and cut up the remaining Straw Hats in a bid for revenge. If it wasn't for Sabo waiting at home for her, she probably would have, Brulee said, wincing as she recalled that horrifying moment where she thought her older brother had been dead. So how did you end up on good terms with him then? Much less fall in love? Deifuku asked in disbelief as he looked at his sister, who blinked for a bit before she smiled and shrugged slightly. He helped me patch up the worst of Katakuri Nai's wounds after the fight before he had to leave to get back to the ship. When I asked him why, he said it was because he didn't mean to hit him so hard. That he had been holding back as much as he could while he fought against us and hadn't known Pedro was going to do a suicide attack, Brulee said, causing all of them to stare in disbelief at the gangly man. You were holding back against the crew of a Yonko who had stolen one of your crew members, Pudding asked slowly as if she wasn't sure of what she was hearing. Well, yeah, you're all a family ... when that happened last time. I had lost my brother, Ace, and I didn't want to take any of your brothers or sisters from you guys. I'd never want someone else to have to go through that pain, Luffy said, as if the answer should have been obvious, and then making all of their eyes wander over to Ace, who winced and put his head down while Whitey's eyes narrowed at this. She'd get the details on it later. Then after everything was said and done, Mama was going to kill me because of how his crew had utilized my powers to their advantage while I was their captive. And don't worry, The most they did was tie me up and have me carried around in a bag like groceries. Brulee said, seeing her siblings begin getting worried and alarmed at the thought of her being captive to enemy pirates. Things never were good for female captives. It wasn't her fault and I didn't want her to die cause of it, so I just kind of swooped in and brought her to our ship. After a while of her being hostile and a bit depressed, she started having fun on the ship and eventually became a member of our crew. Luffy said with a grin, making Brulee give a slightly over-exaggerated bow. Mirror which Brulee of the Straw Hat Pirates at your service. After a while of traveling with this idiot, I started falling for him, and it was a struggle to try and fight those feelings. It was hilarious seeing him so confused on why his chest felt warm when he was around me though, Brulee said with a grin. Then after beating up Kaido, I asked her on a date and she actually said yes. We ended up having to beat up some other pirates though and run from the Marines, but it was fun, Luffy said with a laugh, making Brulee shake her head in exasperation. After dating and having adventures with the crew for several months, he finally asked me to marry him. I said yes, and then 2 days later we ran into red-haired Shanks and Sister Ammon, Brulee said, looking over at Ammon, who didn't bat an eye as all of her siblings turned to look at her now. Why was she with red hair? Big Mom asked, frowning and making Brulee wince slightly as she glanced at her favorite sister. You didn't know that she had been dating Fire Fist. You didn't know she was pregnant with his child either. She hid the pregnancy from everyone except for me, and even then I only knew because of my powers. When you found out that she had loved and had the child of a white-beard pirate, you were going to kill her and her child both, Mama, Brulee said, trying to be gentle about this information and making a few of the siblings wince at what she said. They could see their mother being furious about that if the pirate hadn't gotten her respect like Luffy had done this time. She grabbed Sabo and ran. She ended up with Shanks somehow, and when they met up with us she asked if she could join so that she could stay with the one other family member who wouldn't try to kill her. Of course we said yes. We didn't even know about her baby until after we agreed to let her join, and I didn't know it was Ace's son for another week or two. She was pretty shocked that she had ended up on the same crew as her brother-in-law and hadn't realized it. She'd probably have her memories too, but she didn't consider herself a full crew member when we docked at Raftel, Luffy said, shrugging at the end and causing Ammon to smirk slightly. She had probably been really surprised by that. As far as we can tell, only those who were members of the crew or the Grand Fleet have their memories, even if they were unofficial members of the crew like Princess Vivi. Since Ammon didn't see herself as part of the crew and was still hostile to those that had invaded Totaland, that's our best guess on why she was with us but didn't have her memories like the rest of us, Brulee said with a small shrug as well, and earning a hum from Ammon. Now that I know that your invasion probably put my son at risk, then it was no wonder I was still hostile towards them all, Ammon said after a moment, and earning a nod of agreement from the other Charlottes, especially the mothers. You got used to us soon enough. Brulee and Chopper were your favorites though. You kept mothering Chopper as if he was yours too, and he kept turning red but looked happy anytime it was brought up, Luffy said with a laugh and making Ammon quirk an eyebrow. The cute little reindeer doctor, Ammon questioned, making Brulee nod. Considering he's the size of a toddler, I can see why. Cute though, Ammon said with a small smile, causing Ace to snicker as he stood up as well. To be fair, it was only most notable with Chopper, who was the youngest besides Sabo. Once you got more comfortable around them, you were pretty much the crew mom, Brulee said, making Ammon look a bit embarrassed at that but not ashamed. We're adopting a whole crew? Ace asked with a grin and earning an elbow to the ribs from his fiancé. Straw Hat Mom, Straw Hat Mom, Luffy began singing slightly, making the more musically inclined Charlottes wince. The little kids and the homies began singing it as well, however, making Ammon blush and duck her head a bit. I wonder if Pops will mind me traveling with my new little brother. He certainly keeps things interesting, Whitey asked with a grin, causing Brulee to look over at her and glare slightly, but there wasn't a lot of heat behind it this time. Long as you remember that Luffy is off of the market, Brulee said, causing Whitey to wave her off. Like I said before, I'm not really interested in dating him. He's my new baby brother after all. It's just fun riling you up, Whitey said, earning a laugh from Luffy. It's really fun riling her up. Sometimes I rile her up on purpose because then she'll. Luffy was promptly gagged by Brulee shoving an entire tea cake into his mouth with her face flaming red. Don't say another word. Not if you want to get any kind of reward for the next 2 months, Brulee hissed at Luffy, who stared up at her horrified at this as he swallowed the tea cake whole, much to some of the Charlotte's disbelief. Wow, he's already getting cut off, Ace said with a snicker, only to be given a flat look from Ammon. You would be too if you tried saying anything about your rewards. Not that you have any room to talk since you'll be all but cut off for the next 9 months, Ammon said, making Ace look up at her horrified and shocked. Why? What did I do? Ace asked, making Ammon give him a completely deadpan look. Have you forgotten that your last reward ended up with a consequence that we didn't think was possible? Ammon asked, putting one hand on her stomach pointedly as she stood up to leave as well, since her mother now knew and had to respect the fact that she was not only going to be married but also with child. Well, there was no reason for her not to spend more time with her husband-to-be now. True, but that's okay. After all, the baby's going to be perfect just like his mommy, and we might end up having more that are just as beautiful as you are, Ace said, making Amen's eyes widen before she blushed a bit and looked away, pulling her hat down to cover her face. Flame brains, let's focus on making sure you don't die first before we start planning for more children, Amen said, although she didn't sound upset by the thought of more children. Don't worry, Amani. I already promised that I wouldn't let Ace die this time, and I never break a promise, Luffy said with a grin towards the woman whose head snapped around to him as she gaped a little. Nay, Amen questioned the term added to her name as she stared at the rubber boy. Well, you're marrying my big brother, so that makes you my big sister. Even if you weren't going to marry him, I'm still marrying Brulee, who's your sister. Either way, you're still my big sister, Luffy said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. True, Amen said, and those near her could see the small warm smile on her face. She was used to being called Sister or Niece, but this was the first time anyone shortened her name and called her Amani. Looks like she likes her new title. Why don't you call me Nitu Lu-chan? After all, you joined the alliance and that makes you my little brother too, Whitey said, smiling at Luffy, who gave her a flat look. Because the second I do that, you'll have a brother complex like Ace does. Luffy's voice was completely deadpan and made Whitey blink before opening her mouth as if to say something. Then she just blinked again and slowly closed her mouth. After a minute of everyone staring at her to see how she'd react to that, they all face-palmed or face-planted in disbelief as Whitey grinned. Good point, Lu-chan. Why are you leaving? Luffy asked, looking at his brother confused when Ace made to leave with Amand on his little fire skiff boat thing. Whitey had already left back towards the New World in order to meet up with Pops and her other brothers and tell them about their new little brother in person, as well as about their apparent alliance with Big Mom through said little brother. She had promised to send them pictures or have the snail going so that they could hear the Whitebeard's reactions for themselves. I have to track down Blackbeard, Ace said, blinking and frowning at Luffy, who frowned back. So instead of staying with us when you know he's coming after me, you're going to go off on your own. And not only that, but you're going to take your pregnant girlfriend with you to track down an incredibly dangerous man who led to you dying last time. What if he decides to go after Amand and the baby to get to you? Luffy asked, looking at his brother as if he were stupid and earning a frown from Ace, who hadn't thought about that. Then I'll be following behind you guys while Amand stays with your crew. She'll be safer there with you, Ace said, looking at his fiancée worried and earning a small frown from the woman, but she didn't say anything just yet. It was true. She and Sabo would be safer with Luffy's crew. They are the Second King's crew after all, and had the strength and cunning to survive her mother, and Kaido, and Shanks too if they had made it to Raftel. I don't like being coddled and protected, Amon finally said with a glare as she gripped the hilt of her sword. She was a full-grown woman who had earned her title and bounty. Thank you. Don't think of it as protecting you, sister. Think of it as protecting Sabo-chan. You don't want anything to happen to your baby, do you? Brulee asked, making Amon tense but then relax as she looked away with her hand releasing her sword. No, she didn't want anything happening to her baby. It was a minor miracle that she had even gotten pregnant to start with, given her age and the fact that she was half snake neck. Snake necks were known for having low birthing rates, and since she was a half-breed, this was most likely her only chance at becoming a mother. She didn't want anything to jeopardize her baby. She was going to have this baby and she was going to raise him. She was going to be a far better mother than her own was to her army of siblings. She was going to be like how Mama used to be. How her mother had been until Brulee had been attacked and scared. How her mother had been before Cracker or Smoothie came along. Amon was going to be a good mother to her child. A mother like her own had been when Amon had just been a little girl. Don't worry though. We won't let anyone hurt you and little Sabo. You're my favorite sister after all, Luffy said with a grin and causing Amon to look at him surprised while Brulee snorted slightly. She's your only sister-in-law who hasn't spent 4 years trying to kill you. Most of my sisters were out for your blood on Mother's orders, and the ones who weren't doing it on Mama's orders were doing it because you were a thief, Brulee said, giving her fiancé a fondly exasperated look. Thief? You stole from Mama? Amon asked in disbelief while Ace took this chance to ride off while Amon was distracted. Stole the Germa, stole Sanji back, and I stole Brulee's heart, Luffy said proudly and earning a look from Amon that was part amused, part disbelieving. Stop telling people that, you idiot. Brulee's face was bright red in embarrassment as she lunged at Luffy and began to stretch his cheeks in punishment. Love you too, Luffy said through the stretching out of his face, causing Brulee to turn brighter red and stretch his cheeks out further. Idiot, Brulee said, making Luffy grin even wider as his face snapped back into place when she released him finally. You're idiot, Luffy said without pause and making her blush a bit but smile slightly. Yeah, you are, Brulee said softly, smiling at her boyfriend while the crew chuckled at their antics. Looks like it's time for us to go. Bye, Vivi, Nami said, noting the marine ship starting towards them and firing cannonballs. None of the crew even batting an eye at the dancing Akama that had taken and hid their ship and was using himself and his crew as a diversion for the Straw Hats. Luffy clenched his fists. This time when he went to impel down, he wasn't going to let Bon-chan die. Princess Vivi, what is your relation to those pirates? One Marine yelled at Vivi, who was smiling and waving at the crew all holding up their arms that had a little black X drawn on their wrists. What the hell is up with your fiancé and his crew sister? Ammon asked, watching as the crew waved Vivi off, a silent signal being sent that she was still one of their nakama, while the princess waved them off with her country's military all saluting the Straw Hat Pirates. A flag Usopp had made being held up proudly by the color guard and an identical one flying over the palace. He's a lovable idiot with a heart of gold and a sense for adventure. Pretty sure he's crazy too, Brulee said, grinning at her sister, her mirror mask forming on her face out of habit at the Marines so close by. So did the swordsman really defeat Mihawk? Ammon asked, glancing at the first mate curiously and earning nods from the crew as they sailed away from the Marines and island. He did. He's just as crazy as Luffy, by the way, or probably crazier given that he willingly follows my idiot husband, Brulee said, making Ammon grin towards the swordsman. Oi, demon mutt. After my baby's born and I get back into shape from pregnancy, how about a spar? Ammon asked, making Zoro laugh a bit. Sure thing, demon lady. We'll find a nice deserted island so we don't kill anyone by accident, Zoro said, grinning at her, and his grin looked dangerous and sharp. I'll make sure to note down any appropriately empty islands, Nami said dryly but sighing as she steered them away from Alabasta. Hey Lou, are we going to be dealing with Foxy and his pirates again? Usopp asked, wincing at the thought of that horrible moment when he thought Luffy had lost the fight against Foxy and had lost all of his crew. Nah, I don't want to deal with him. If he makes one mention of taking anyone from my crew, I'll just give him a gum bullet, Luffy said, scowling slightly, his arms wrapping around Brulee possessively. Fufu. If he tried to take the queen, perhaps the captain would show us his entrails, Robin asked with a chuckle. Ammon looked at the woman in disbelief while Chopper and Usopp pulled faces. The others didn't even bat an eye, and instead Brulee just sighed. Oh, there's her morbid sense of humor. It's been a while since you've said something like that, Robin. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.